Hey, everybody. Welcome, welcome, welcome. Glad that you are here tonight. As you can see, I am back in my lovely Brooklyn apartment, sitting in front of the famous bookshelf. We'll try to keep our voices down. My beautiful wife is sleeping in the other room. And yeah, it's one of those nights back from Texas, back from the big conference that we just had. So much to report on that's happening in the world. So it's going to be a great stream tonight. Before we get into things, if you can just hit the like button, hit the subscribe button, be sure to hit the subscribe button, be sure to hit that notifications bell because people have been telling me they haven't been getting the notifications. So just crush that notifications bell. Make sure you're subscribed. If you have something you want me to talk about in the second half of the show, we will answer super chats. That's how we roll. And it's going to be a great show tonight. I've got some great, interesting, I've got some great opening remarks for you. I think they're interesting, but there you go. They're opening remarks. Then we'll do the roll call. Then we'll answer super chats for the second half of the show. So hit the like button, hit the subscribe button, hit the notifications bell. We are going to jump right into it right after we watch our opener. So everyone hit that like button. Get your super chat questions ready. We are ready to roll.
Spoken of the American century. I say that the century on which we are entering can be and must be the century of the common man.
A radical redistribution of economic power.
I mean, we know that racism is just a byproduct of capitalism. Everything would be all right if everything was put back in the hands of the people.
We need a government that will make sure Americans are taken care of and organize the economy to serve the people, not the profits of a wealthy few.
We now have the techniques and the resources to get rid of poverty.
We got to start getting out there with the people.
Get out of the movement and get to the masses.
We need a government of action.
All right, everybody. Welcome, welcome, welcome. So glad that you're here. So tonight we're going to talk about a number of things, but my opening remarks are going to focus on a recurring theme of these broadcasts, which is what's wrong with the left. Justice William O. Douglas. And I'm writing down super chats as we go along. This is what's wrong with the left. How did the left get so confused? Right now, as you all are well aware, there is a war going on in Ukraine. The regime that's been backed up by the United States since it toppled the government in 2014 is now being brought to term by Russia. They have been bombing and shelling the people of Donetsk and Lugansk for the past 8 years, and that has been relentless. There's been a food blockade. They've been persecuting Russian speakers. They've been threatening to join NATO, threatening to get nuclear weapons. We now know that these governments have been setting up, PDFs of books free. We'll talk about that. We now know that defund the oligarchy. Thank you for the super chat. All right. And we now know that they've been setting up biolabs in Ukraine. The Pentagon has been setting up biolabs. How do you think the United States would react if Russia were setting up biolabs for military purposes in Mexico? Now they say they weren't for military purposes. Interesting. Why would the Pentagon be setting them up then in a foreign country? And yeah, every day more information comes out basically showing why Russia is in a situation where they feel they have to intervene. Economic shock therapy in Russia in the 90s. Sure, we'll talk about that. Every day, more information comes out. We find out they had torture facilities. Not only were they bombing and shelling the people of the eastern regions, not only that, that they were now we understand they were arresting people in the eastern regions and torturing them. They had torture facilities. Now we see these Ukrainians that are oh so democratic and freedom fighters. They are painting people's faces green. And it's not just regular green paint. It's actually a paint that causes eyesight to be lost. They're tying them to poles. Sometimes the women are stripped from pants down so people can just walk by and molest them. It's horrendous what these Ukrainian fascists are doing. The Azov battalion is functioning. This is an openly fascist division. I mean, it's becoming more and more apparent why Russia has to get involved and has to say, no, you don't. And they've waited 8 years. 8 years, the people of Donetsk and Lugansk have been asking for recognition from Russia. For 8 years, Russia has said no. They've said implement the Minsk agreements. But now the Kiev regime, backed by the United States, has made it abundantly clear they're not going to do that. So Russia is moving in and bringing the hammer down. Okay. Vatican imperialism. All right. Okay. Vatican. Putin tried in Hague. And it's very, very apparent why Russia had to move in and had to stop what was being done to the people of Donetsk and Lugansk and stop the threats along their border, stop the USA continuing to arm and prop up this fanatical regime. But you all know that. You watch these streams, you all know that already. I'm not telling you anything you don't know. You can watch, there was a great demonstration in New York City 2 days ago, where they protested. They made this point. I've made this point in stream after stream after stream. All right, Jimmy Dore, we'll talk about that. And I go on Jimmy Dore. And, and we've talked about that here. That's not totally what I wanted to talk about, but I just wanted to show you before I get into the heavy stuff. A little bit later, we're going to talk about the Trotskyite to neocon pipeline and some important history. We're going to talk about the Boston trap and some of the history of activism in Boston that helps explain why PSL and some of the socialist groups are taking a bad position. But before we get to that, we're going to start with just the most vulgar example of leftism, supporting imperialism. And that is the great Jabba the Vosh. Wah, 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 wah. Russia is imperialist. Rah, rah, rah. I love the Azov Battalion. Rah, 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 rah. Rah, 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 rah. I mean, we're going to talk about the great Jabba the Vosh. We got 2 clips of here. I'm sorry to have to do this to you, to show you clips of Vosh. We've got 2 very short clips here. And this shows you, one, how Vosh thinks, which is probably the most important thing. 2, how Vosh lies and how he's inaccurate. And 3, where we're at. I mean, this is the guy who's been propped up as the voice of socialism. They've had him on the Hill, Hill Rising. They've had him on there, Rising the Hill. They've had him on that show with Crystal Ball, and now it's Kim Iverson who's on there. And thank you very much, Gordon Osterhage. This guy, they're trying to make him. I mean, I wouldn't be surprised if he's in Congress someday. I mean, that's how serious. And this is the level of intellectual depth that the pro-imperialist socialist Jabba the Vosh, Beverly Hills child of rich Hollywood parents who supports the Azov Battalion and has a history of strange comments about child pornography. This is him talking about our conference. 2 clips of him. The first one I'm going to show you. This is Vosh. He plays a clip from my speech at the conference that someone audio recorded. Somebody who came to the conference audio recorded it. And he plays the clip of me talking and reacts to it. And I want you to pay very close attention to how this goes, right? MLK Memorial made in China. I don't know anything about that. MLK Memorial made in China. All right, writing it down. But this is the first clip. And I want you to see here. This will show you how Vosh thinks, because this is very telling. This is Vosh reacting to a clip from my opening remarks at the conference.
This here, man. Oh, do we have a...
of the global capitalist
Here we go. We have Burger King himself with just some audio, I suppose.
Of the global capitalist system, and they did this by organizing the economy to serve public good and not the profits of a wealthy few. In the 1990s, when the Soviet Union fell, the USA loved Russia. Russia's economy was in collapse, and people were starving. Boris Yeltsin was Bill Clinton's buddy, and the USA meddled in the 1996 elections to make sure that Yeltsin got reelected as he was wrecking the country with austerity and shock therapy neoliberal economics. Directed, of course, by George Soros.
Now, keep in mind, everything I said up until then is documented fact. The USA did meddle in the elections in Russia. Russia's economy was devastated by shock therapy economics. The USA did, work with Boris Yeltsin and wreck their economy. Everything I said up until that point is really relevant in U.S. geopolitics and what's going on with Russia. Keep that in mind. But he just sits there and nods because he doesn't know anything about that. But then I said the magic words, George Soros. Listen to this.
But things in Russia...
Dude, I'm so glad George Soros exists because it's such an easy fucking Nazi like radar for everyone else. It's literally just the JQ. So just so you guys know, like George Soros is a relatively politically active billionaire. Like he's on the Democrat side. He's I guess relatively progressive. But like the progressivism of George Soros is like Hillary Clinton tier progressivism, and he's not the only billionaire that does this. There are hundreds of billionaires.
Now, you see that? That tells you everything you need to know about Vosh. I was on there talking about actual events that happened, like shock therapy economics destroying Russia's economy, like the USA meddling in the Russian elections in 1996 to get Boris Yeltsin reelected, like Bill Clinton being the buddy of Boris Yeltsin and the USA getting along with Russia fine as long as their economy was in collapse and people were starving. I'm talking about actual facts. But then I said another actual fact, which is that George Soros was heavily involved. And immediately he just goes to answer 27B. Well, folks, I have a book here in front of you. This is a best-selling book, not a right-wing book, not a book by a right-winger. This is by Naomi Klein, a leftist, a New York Times best-selling book called The Shock Doctrine. This is about the imposition of free market neoliberal economics around the world during the 1990s. And this is what it says. This is what it says. Quote, Sachs' work in Poland had begun before Solidarity's election victory at the request of the communist government. It started with a one-day trip in which he met with the communist government and with Solidarity. It was George Soros, the billionaire financier and currency trader, who had enlisted Sachs to play a more hands-on role. Soros and Sachs traveled to Warsaw together, and as Sachs recalls, I told the Solidarity group and the Polish government I'd be willing to become more involved to help address the deepening crisis. Soros agreed to cover the costs for Sachs and his colleague David Lipton, a staunch free marketeer economist, then working at the IMF to set up the ongoing mission in Poland. That's not all. Page 296. It gets better. It gets better. It gets better. George Soros' philanthropic work in Eastern Europe, including his funding of Sachs' travel throughout the region, has not been immune to controversy. There is no doubt that Soros was committed to the cause of democratization of the Eastern Bloc, but he also had clear economic interests in the economic reform accompanying democratization. As the world's most powerful currency trader, he stood to benefit greatly when countries implemented convertible currencies and lifted capital controls, and when state companies were put on the auction block. That George Soros's role in wrecking the Eastern Bloc is documented fact. I didn't mention George Soros because I'm anti-Semitic. I didn't mention George Soros because he's a Democrat and Democrats are communists. I mentioned George Soros because George Soros was heavily involved in financing Jeffrey Sachs to go across Eastern Europe, implementing free market reforms and wrecking the economy. Vosh doesn't know that because Vosh is a fucking idiot. All Vosh knows is Soros is a thing that right-wingers say. And so if anyone says Soros, they are anti-Semitic. Oh, he said Soros, he right-wing. Soros right-wing. Soros Democrat. He hate Democrat. He hates Soros because Soros Jew. He knows none of this. This is a very widely read book. This is a very, very widely read book, The Shock Doctrine. Naomi Klein is a member, I believe, of Democratic Socialists of America. And this is where I learned about George Soros and Jeffrey Sachs and David Lipton's role in the fall of the Soviet Union. I am talking about a well-documented fact that anyone familiar with the fall of the Soviet Union and economics would know about. But John the Vosh doesn't know about it. He just knows that George Soros is bad. George Soros is bad. Anyone who mentions George Soros is anti-Semitic. Why would he mention Soros? There's so many other liberal billionaires. I'm not talking about George Soros in the United States, you idiot. I'm talking about George Soros and the role he played in Eastern Europe. I'm talking about something that all kinds of progressives talk about. Don't just read this book. Read Europe Since 1989 by Philip Thayer. The role of George Soros in rolling back socialism in Eastern Europe, in pushing free market reforms that wrecked the economy of Russia, wrecked the economy of Poland, wrecked the economy of Ukraine, wrecked the economy of Czechoslovakia, is a well-documented fact. But Vaush doesn't know anything about economics. He just knows there are these people called right-wingers, and they're bad. And my job is to get on the internet and attack them. And if anyone doesn't support war with Russia, they're a right-winger. Rah, 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 rah. He's a fucking idiot, okay? He is a fucking idiot. And that clip right there is the best proof of it you have ever seen. I actually know who George Soros is. He doesn't. He knows George Soros is a rich guy who donates to Democrats. I, on the other hand, know that George Soros is a Hungarian-born billionaire who was key in working with the CIA to funnel money to color revolutions and CIA-led protests to bring down socialism in Eastern Europe. That's what I know. I know about who George Soros is. I've studied this stuff. Vaush hasn't. He just has a list of things you're not allowed to say. There's a list of things you're not allowed to say. If anyone says this, that means they right-wing, they bad. Vaush, did Caleb say George Soros? Anyone who says George Soros, bad. This guy is an idiot. Look at that clip. And no one should ever listen to Vaush about anything again. He knows absolutely nothing about what he's talking about. If what Vaush said in that clip is an accurate analysis of what I said, then Naomi Klein is an anti-Semite. That's basically Vaush, according to Vaush, Naomi Klein, the author of this book, The Shock Doctrine, that documents the role of George Soros in the economic demolition of Russia during the 1990s. According to Vaush, Naomi Klein is a Nazi. Because the only reason, did you hear him on there? The only reason anyone ever mentions George Soros is the JQ. No, we're talking about facts. We are talking about facts. He doesn't even know what I'm talking about. I'm sitting there talking about shock therapy economics. I'm sitting there talking about real, actual facts. And he's just like, oh, he said George Soros. That means, that alone should be enough for you to dismiss him. But I got another one. I voted for Trump. I meant because I thought they were all like Vaush and insane and nasty. Well, I'm really glad to hear that. I'm really, really glad to hear that, cool dude. Really, really glad to hear that. By the way, Soros, I will fly or fly in Esperanto. Unfortunately, Sai, there were Esperantists in Eastern Europe during World War II. Okay, I don't speak. Esperanto is that universal language. I'm not familiar with that. But anyway, just wanted to get that out of the way. But then there's another clip of the great Vaush. And this one, I'm going to stop it halfway. Well, no, I think we'll just watch the whole thing just to show you what he's all about. So let's just go ahead. All right, this is the next one. He's showing.
Okay, are there more than 40 people in this room? I hope they were charging $800 a ticket because there's no other way. I know whoever filmed this was a fan of mine because while filming this incredibly embarrassing shit, they zoom in on Burger King and Peter Coffin, you know? I can't believe this. Are they not? Oh, damn, I'm almost disappointed. Well, maybe they just edited it. That is so funny. This is like the highlight of their lives. Jesus. They look so dorky, dude. Holy shit. Haas is dating Samira Khan. Oh, base.
Okay, now listen to that clip. Now, keep in mind, so there was somebody who came into the conference, and they were there at the very, very end. I mean, it was almost midnight at the very end. And yeah, towards the end, after the Q&A was over, after people were kind of getting up during the Q&A, people had been there since 1 in the afternoon. It was almost midnight. It got a little bit smaller towards the end of the day. So based on this clip of something at the end of the day, he's trying to say, oh, were there even more than 40 people there? Well, there were well over 100 people there, according to a number of people who counted. Jackson Hinkle was saying 120. So, you know, if you add up, you know, I think we counted a certain number of people who came in, but then if you add all the speakers and all the volunteers and all the security guards, it was well over 100 people that were there. But you'll notice that that's his only reaction to this. It's like, oh, they look dorky with the flags. And then from there he goes to Haas is dating Samira Khan. This guy is a fucking high school idiot. He can't understand politics with any level of depth whatsoever. None. So all he's got is like, oh, there are even 40 people there, and look, they're carrying flags, and oh, look, Samira and Haas are dating. I mean, it's like his life is an episode of Beverly Hills 90210. That's how smart this man is. Yeah, let's watch the opening of the conference. Let's see. You think there's more than 40 people here?
All beliefs.
I don't know. Is that
all
more
races,
than 40 people
all colors,
taking the
all
Pledge of Unity?
nationalities, all beliefs.
Is that more than 40 people? More than 40 people? I
To
don't know.
eliminate
That
all
room looks like
traces
it has
of
more than
fascism
40
from
people
the
in it,
earth.
boss.
Who's
He's
standing
just
for the
a lying
international
sack of
politics
shit.
of
Look at
US
this. Look at this. Look at this. Right? Look at this. Right? You know, people standing. I mean, that is all you should ever listen. Look at that room. There are more than 40 people in the room. I think there is. But who cares, right? Let's just focus on who's dating who right now. Let's focus on the high school drama. Let's focus on who's dating who and all of that. Vaush is a neocon. Absolutely, Vaush is a neocon. So I just had to get that out of my system. If you are somebody who is triggered by Vaush, you can turn the stream back on now. The Vaush stuff is over. Jabba the Vaush has left the building. But I just wanted to show you that is the level of discourse. He literally has no clue about what happened when the Soviet Union fell and that George Soros had a role in it. He just knows George Soros is a thing the right wingers say. And then his other reaction is like, they're like dorks, man. They got like flags and who's dating who? Oh my God, someone's dating so and so. I mean, it's this guy, his like brain stopped developing when he was 15 years old. Okay, he sits around playing video games all day. This guy is a man child who knows nothing about Marxism, and people are turning to him to educate people about the most important ideology that basically defined the 20th century. So if you can't understand why it makes me angry that people listen to this troll, this creep, this Hollywood fail son. You just saw that's his analysis of our conference, that I said George Soros and I must be a stupid Republican, and that we're dorky because we carried flags, and that someone's dating somebody, which I don't even know for a fact is true. I was there. I talked to both of them. I had no knowledge of any relationship, but then who knows? Whatever. That's not the point, right? I mean, there's real politics here, real economics. He doesn't know any of that. So why would you listen to him? That is my question to you. Why in the world would you listen to him? I just wanted to get that out of the way. But anyway, we're going to talk about some actual relevant stuff. The stuff that people actually watch this stream to talk about. If you wanted to talk about me dunking on some other personalities, plenty of streams you could watch of me showing other people's videos or somebody showing other people's videos. But a lot of people talk about the neocon, or the Trotskyite to neocon pipeline, right? This is a very common thing. It was brought up mainly during the Iraq War. When the USA invaded Iraq back in 2003, the USA said that Iraq had weapons of mass destruction. It didn't. The USA said that Iraq was somehow involved in the 9/11 attacks. They weren't. Osama bin Laden was a Wahhabi fanatic from Saudi Arabia. And on top of that, Saddam Hussein is a Ba'athist Arab socialist. No relationship with each other. They fought against each other in the Iraq-Iran war, for goodness sakes. It was just absolutely ridiculous. Just an absolutely ridiculous claim. But based on, Saddam Hussein, dictator, bad, we got to spread some freedom around the world. The USA invaded Iraq. And there were a number of people who were advisors to the Bush administration who came out of a school of thought called neoconservatism. So among libertarians, it started out with like libertarians, people at antiwar.com, people started talking about how a lot of them were former Trotskyites. They were former members of the socialist movement. They were Trotskyites. There's a whole story there that's really interesting. And these libertarians, the way that they interpreted it was just, oh, Bush must be a communist. He's trying to spread communist revolution all over the world. No. Much more complicated than that. But there's a very important story there. And if you want to look at the roots of the neocon, or the Trotskyite to neocon pipeline, this is the book that you should read. And this is a Trotskyite book, mind you. I don't often recommend Trotskyite books, so this is a great exception. This is The Struggle for a Proletarian Party by James Cannon. James Cannon is the father of American Trotskyism. He was the leader of the Socialist Workers' Party of the United States. He was originally in the Communist Party, then broke away to join the Trotskyist movement, founder of the Socialist Workers' Party. And in 1939, there was a big dramatic shift in Soviet foreign policy. So you have to remember, this is back in the 1930s. Hitler's in power in Germany. Mussolini's in power in Italy. The United States, Roosevelt, who's kind of a progressive, is in power. And the Soviet Union had oriented their supporters and their allies in the Communist Party to support Roosevelt in what they called the Popular Front. The idea was to build the labor movement, defeat fascism, to build the Popular Front. And, in Spain, there was a Popular Front government that was elected, and then fascists launched an insurgency against it. And there was the Spanish Civil War, and communists from all over the world went to Spain to fight against fascism. There was a whole thing with the Popular Front, and the communists were aligned, sympathetic to Roosevelt and anti-fascism, etc. But then, 1939, there was a big shift. And why was there a big shift? The whole time that the Soviet Union was orienting its followers to build this Popular Front against fascism, they went to the British, they went to the Americans, they went to the French, they went to different governments around the world, and they said, let's build an anti-fascist alliance. Let's build an anti-fascist alliance. And the United States flat out said no. And they had the Neutrality Act. They banned any support for the Spanish Republic. And the British flat out said no, and they wouldn't offer any support. And for a little while, the French offered support, but then they changed their minds and they said no. So in 1939, after the Soviet Union had gone to capitalist country after capitalist country, begging them to join a global anti-fascist bloc, and they saw that the Nazis were getting ready for a war and were starting to expand, in 1939, you had the Molotov-Ribbentrop Pact that was signed, which is the Soviet Union said, look, we got to buy time. We don't want to be attacked by the Nazis. And so in order to buy time, since the Western capitalist powers are not going to make a deal with us, and since the French backed out of the deal they made with us, we're going to sign a non-aggression pact with the Nazis. And so in 1939, they drew a line down Europe. And the agreement was the Soviet Union would not move their troops past the line, and the Nazis wouldn't move their troops past the line. And that was the agreement. And that line went straight down Europe, right? And so they signed this non-aggression pact, basically, because no military alliance would be made with the Western capitalist countries. The Soviet Union felt they had no choice. They had to align with somebody. And so they made an alliance, it wasn't an alliance, but a non-aggression pact with the Nazis, right? It was a temporary move. But at that moment, the communists, who had been supporting Roosevelt and had been part of this anti-fascist Popular Front, immediately got attacked in mainstream media. They started accusing them, I believe Time magazine started calling them the communazis. And, the Communist Party, they went from being a very, very popular and sympathetic group. Roosevelt was having them sleep over at the White House, to suddenly Earl Browder, the leader of the Communist Party, was sent to federal prison on a passport violation. And the communists were just being demonized and put in jail, and they suddenly fell out of favor. And the mainstream media was going, oh, what hypocrites the communists are. They've been saying anti-fascism for the past 2 or 3 years, but now all of a sudden they signed a non-aggression pact with the Nazis. There's even a stupid song that people wrote to make fun of the Communist Party. Up in Moscow, in the Kremlin, in the fall of 39, there's a Russian and a Prussian writing out the party line. It was like everybody was just demonizing the Communist Party for this, right? And what happened? Well, the Nazis invaded Poland, but when the Nazis invaded Poland, they didn't go past that line. They kept their alliance with the Soviets. And so the Soviets, they knew the Nazis were going to invade them. So they moved their army right up to that line in Poland. They moved it right up to the line. And some people say it was a joint invasion. It wasn't a joint invasion. The Polish government in exile never declared war on the Soviet Union. And it wasn't a joint invasion. It was the Soviet Union saw that pact, the Molotov-Ribbentrop Pact, the Stalin-Hitler Pact, was on the brink of breaking. They saw that the Nazis had moved into Poland after promising not to. And they said, okay, we're going to move our forces right up to the line. And they did, right? And of course, the U.S. media said, oh, this proves the Nazis and the communists are working together. They invaded Poland together, blah, 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 blah. So amid all of this, a number of leaders of the Socialist Workers' Party, the Trotskyites in New York City Trotskyites, they got together and they said, okay, the fact that the Soviet Union signed a treaty with the Nazis, that proves they can't be a socialist country, because no socialist country would ever do such a thing. And even though, and Trotsky maintained, Trotsky was against the Soviet Union's leadership, but he said the Soviet Union was what he called a degenerated workers' state, Max Shachtman, Martin Aborn, and James Burnham, 3 big names in the New York City wing of the Socialist Workers' Party, came out and quit the Socialist Workers. They had a factional fight, and they were kicked out of the Socialist Workers' Party, right? And Martin Aborn, James Burnham, Max Shachtman. And it's from them. It's their followers, people that were part of what they called the New York Intellectuals. That's another book I've got right up here, The New York Intellectuals. It's among the New York Intellectuals that you got many future neocons. The New York Intellectuals. You got Irving Kristol. You got Irving Howe. Well, he became a DSA social democrat, but a lot of the, Gene Kirkpatrick, a lot of the people that went on to be figures in the Reagan administration and the Bush administration were individuals who had been in the Socialist Workers' Party and broke away in 1939. And at the time that this split happened, this book was published, The Struggle for a Proletarian Party by James Cannon, explaining why it was that these folks turned against Marxism. Why did they turn against Marxism? This is what he writes. It is only those who took Bolshevism as a set of literary formulas, espousal of which gave one a certain distinction in radical circles without incurring any serious responsibilities. Those who adopted Trotskyism as a form of extreme radicalism, which never went beyond the bounds of sophisticated debate. It is such people who are the most inclined to falter and to lose their heads under the pressures of crisis, and even to blame their panic on the same Trotskyism which simply remains true to itself. They could stomach the Moscow trials, but not the prospect of coming into collusion with the democratic government of U.S. imperialism. After the Soviet invasion of Poland and then of Finland, the flight of fellow travelers became rout. This wild migration attracted wide attention and comment. We ourselves contributed our observations and witticisms on this ludicrous spectacle. Up to now, however, we remain silent on an analogous phenomenon in our own periphery. The flight of the more sophisticated but hardly more courageous intellectual fellow travelers of American Trotskyism has been scarcely less precipitate and catastrophic. With the approach of the war, Trotskyism as a doctrine began to lose its respectability. Many intellectuals, sniffing danger, arranged a somewhat hasty and undignified departure. In truth, there's not much left of that considerable army of drawing room heroes who admired Trotsky's literary style and confound the less intelligent periphery of Stalinism with nuggets of wisdom mined from Trotsky's writings. The collapse of the Trotskyist cultural front was taken by some, especially ex-fronters themselves, to signify the collapse of our movement. The petty bourgeois intellectuals are introspective by nature. They mistake their own emotions, their uncertainties, their fears, and their egotistic concerns about their personal fate for the sentiments of movements of the great masses. They measure the world's agony by their own inconsequential aches and pains. It is noteworthy that the New York organization of the party, thanks to its unfavorable social composition, with exceptional force and virtue, while the proletarian centers of the party remained virtually unaffected, the tendency of petty bourgeois elements to flee from our program and repudiate our tradition is counterposed to a remarkable demonstration of loyalty to the program and to the party by the proletarian membership. He's describing who these people were. These were people that were interested in communism because it was trendy, because it was hip, because they were middle-class intellectuals, and it made them sound smart. But as soon as the respectability went away, as soon as international events changed and made it so that it was no longer hip and cool to be able to quote Trotsky, they ran away and they denounced Trotskyism and they denounced the Soviet Union as no longer a deformed workers' state. He's basically describing like half of Brooklyn. I mean, he's describing the hipster leftists of DSA right now. These people are for a revolution until one actually happens. And they're against counter-revolution until one actually happens. I mean, he's describing in detail these petty bourgeois elements, right? He goes on. He goes on in great detail. I mean, there's a lot I could read you here. I mean, it's really fascinating. These are the people who eventually became neocons. The driving impulses behind the opposition as a whole are petty bourgeois nervousness at the prospect of impending struggles, difficulties, and sacrifices, and the unconscious desire to avoid them at all costs. That's basically what these folks were. They were radicals when it was hip and cool, but suddenly, when defending the Soviet Union meant you were defending a country that had to sign a non-aggression pact with the Nazis, suddenly, oh no, they were out of there. They wanted to be cool. They wanted to fit in. They wanted to go to hip parties. They couldn't take any risks. Yes, I mean, this is, I could read you a lot. I mean, I've got a couple other sections here, right? And he goes on to say this doesn't mean we should be anti-intellectual. I thought this was good. Because basically, at the time, these people are being kicked out of the Socialist Workers' Party because they're denouncing the Soviet Union, you know. He said, they were accusing them of being anti-intellectual. They said, well, you're against us because we're intellectuals. And this is James Cannon. He says, it's not true that the advanced militant workers are hostile to education and prejudice against educated people. Just the contrary. They have an exaggerated respect for every intellectual who approaches the movement and an exaggerated appreciation of the little services he renders. This was never demonstrated more convincingly than in the reception accorded to James Burnham when he formally entered our movement, and an extraordinary consideration has been given to him at the time, and he became a member of the National Committee without ever having served any apprenticeship in the class struggle. This is good here. He talks about they're not anti-intellectual, but at the end of the day, these folks are afraid of losing their respectability. He goes on to say, petty bourgeois politics is always a hodgepodge. It never attains a fully developed, consistent program. Every petty bourgeois formation, whether faction or independent, has thus this characteristic feature. It fights at best for partial aims and slurs over contradictions and differences within its ranks. But then describing Marxism, he says, Marxists always begin with the program. They rally around the program and educate them in its meaning in the process of the struggle. The political victories of Marxists are always, in first place, victories for their program. A lot of good stuff in here. And if you want to understand who these people are who became neocons, who eventually became neocons, this is the book that describes them in great detail and how they function. How it was a discussion group, it was a gossip club, it was a way to maintain respectability, to feel like, oh, I'm not a dumb Stalinist. Oh no, I'm very intellectual. I'm a Trotskyite. And the second it stopped being respectable, they moved on. And I see a bunch of super chats have gone by. I'm gonna go over those real quick. But what happened was that during the 1950s, a lot of these folks got hired. They got hired by Partisan Review magazine, which was set up by the CIA. Irving Kristol was the director of the CIA's Congress for Cultural Freedom program. And that's how this all happened, right? So Polish American Friends Soviets cracked down brutally on Poles after they entered. All right. Okay. So they cracked Poles after they entered. All right. And we'll keep going. I know I missed a couple more, so I wrote one down that I put on the screen when I was playing a clip. That's who became the neocons. This middle class tendency. Is anyone? Yeah, I saw that one. I wrote that one down. Okay. Wrote that one down earlier. Okay. Thank you, Don. Wrote that down. All right. All right. What other? Oh, and that's all of them. Okay. Very good. But it's these folks. They started working for Partisan Review magazine. And Partisan Review magazine was this like CIA funded magazine that claimed to be a socialist magazine, but was putting out pro-U.S. imperialist stuff, demonizing the Soviet Union. It was all funded by the CIA. Irving Kristol was heavily involved in the program, as were a number of people. And a lot of the big names that you associate with leftism now, Hannah Arendt, Susan Sontag, a lot of the cultural critics, they came out of this program. And they were Trotskyites Trotskyites who turned against the Soviet Union. They ultimately rejected Trotsky's position that the Soviet Union was a degenerated workers' state. They said the Soviet Union must be capitalist. And then you have to talk about the role of Leo Strauss, right? Leo Strauss, who wrote Persecution and the Art of Writing, about how intellectuals are being persecuted. There's these rabble who want to persecute the intellectuals, and they have to be controlled, right? He writes, Persecution in the Art of Writing argues that the works of the great philosophers throughout history are all written in code because the intellectuals fear persecution by the rabble, by the working class, and that you have to write in code, and then they redefine fascism. Instead of fascism being capitalism in decay, a result of capitalist crisis. Oh no. According to them, fascism is when the rabble get together and suppress the intellectuals. Fascism is people in groups, Susan Sontag's essay. And this is where the neocons come out of. And then we're told that the idea is that, that there are good regimes that have freedom for the intellectuals, i.e., they have free market capitalism. They protect the private property of the intellectuals, and they let the ruling class hire these intellectuals to manage their foreign policy. And then there are the bad regimes, the populist regimes like the Soviet Union or Venezuela, which they equate with fascism, and they're trying to restrict the great intellectuals and hold them back. And so you have to do everything you can to control the rabble and keep them from getting in the way of the great intellectuals. That's the neocon mindset. That's the neocon mindset, and that is their view of the world, that the average people are dangerous. They need to be lied to. They need to be manipulated. They need to be brainwashed, because if they start getting together and fighting for their rights, it means the end of these great intellectuals who are supposed to rule over us. That's the teaching of the neoconservatives, and you can see it, the very beginnings of it, in the struggle for a proletarian party. That's how they were talking. They didn't like the Soviet Union. It signed a treaty with the Nazis, and it suddenly wasn't respectable to support it anymore. And you can see in the way they were talking, accusing them of being anti-intellectual, and they were basically afraid to stand against U.S. imperialism. They were afraid to stand against the tide, and as a result of that, all right, Brezhnev era of USSR. As a result of that, they caved in, and eventually they first became kind of a deceptive propaganda tactic to manipulate leftists to be against the Soviet Union. That's how the CIA started hiring them. And eventually a lot of them just became straight up Republicans. They were so opposed to these populist regimes that threaten the freedom of intellectuals, they became hard right Republicans. That's the root of the neoconservatives. Vaush would be definitely a neoconservative. Right now he's dressing up in socialist clothing. But at the end of the day, he hates Russia. He doesn't hate Russia because of Ukraine. He doesn't hate Russia. The reason that Vaush hates Russia is because there's a leader in Russia named Vladimir Putin who draws his strength from a population that he's done a lot to win the support of. Russia's not a socialist country. But in the 1990s, Russia was being destroyed economically. Putin came into office and he put oil and gas under state ownership, and he stabilized the economy and started using the government and using Bonapartist measures to improve the lives of working people. And that scares the crap out of Vaush. That's because that means that the wealthy people he lives with in Beverly Hills are going to start getting kicked around. That's what that means. That means average working class people like you and me are going to start having leaders who fight for us. And that's what terrifies him. Putin puts wealthy people in jail. Did you know that? Putin has jailed oligarchs. He has shut down and nationalized their companies. Putin is a populist and a Bonapartist. He's not a full-on socialist. He rejects Marxism and the economy there's a lot of private enterprise. They definitely are not the Soviet Union. But Putin is a populist, and he mobilizes people that Vaush considers to be inferior, and he fights for them, and he kicks the ass of big corporations, and he jails corporate executives. And people like Vaush and the rich people who live in his neighborhood are terrified of some kind of populist, Bonapartist, or progressive socialist government coming into power in the United States. Whenever they see any leader doing anything like that, it scares the crap out of them. It scares the crap out of them. They want a free market. They want the government to just sit back and let things crumble. They want rich. They don't want any rule. They're triggered by authoritarianism. And this is what you need to remember. See, without authoritarianism, right? I mean, if there's no law, what do they call it? They call it the law of the jungle. And what is the law of the jungle? The law of the jungle is the strongest survive. And in America, the strongest are those with the most money. And so, yeah, they want the government's hands off so they can de facto rule. Thank you, space communists. That's what they want, right? He wants the government to not be involved at all so that he and his wealthy friends can just sit back and rule because they have the money, right? Law of the jungle, the strongest survive, and they're the strongest because they have the most money. Sounds a lot like Ayn Rand, and that's what they want. And when a Putin comes along, or a Xi Jinping, or a Stalin, or a Hugo Chavez, or a Juan Perón comes along and says, no, I am going to use state power to kick the ass of these corporations, to make the economy start working for the people. I already wrote that super chat down. I'm going to answer that. You know, when that happens, it scares the crap out of them, and they scream authoritarianism. You know, working people's lives in the United States are already highly authoritarian. They have police brutality in their communities. You know, they have a prison industrial complex. They go through metal detectors at school every day. They get suspended for wearing the wrong color because the teacher says it's a gang color. Working class people's lives are already authoritarian, but they don't matter, according to people like Vaush. What scares Vaush is when the elite, when the ruling class, when the de facto rulers, the rich and powerful people start getting kicked around by a government that actually fights for the people. It scares the crap out of them. And they scream authoritarianism. It's threatening their greatness. They think that they're the great intellectuals who they are terrified. They don't want to see average people like the people in your neighborhood, in your community, running things. That scares them. And they don't want to see leaders who are actually accountable to the people in your neighborhood and your community. That scares them. And they think that that's the same as Hitler. They think the Soviet Union, because the Soviet government was having the economy be planned and organizing the economy to serve the people, they think that's the same as Hitler, because it would mean that they would be threatened. This is about their class interest. That's what you have to understand. And that this libertarian socialism, this radical liberalism, it's triggered by authoritarianism, that thinks socialism has nothing to do with the government, that thinks Putin's a Nazi or a fascist. That's what all of this is about. It is protecting the privileges of the petty bourgeoisie and the bourgeoisie themselves. It is about fear of the broad masses. They're not afraid of Putin. They're not afraid of Putin. They're not afraid of Xi Jinping. They're not afraid of Fidel Castro. They're not afraid of Maduro. They're afraid of the people that Putin has made happy. Living standards in Russia have significantly risen since Putin has come into office. He has stabilized the economy by getting Jeffrey Sachs and his buddy George Soros out of there, by forcing the economy to once again start growing, by putting oil and gas under public ownership and using it to plan out the economy. They've improved the lives of average people in Russia. People in Russia's lives have gotten a lot better as a result of Putin's policies. And that's what scares them. They're terrified of something like that happening in the United States, God forbid. That's what they're afraid of. They are afraid of you. They're not afraid of Putin. They're not afraid of me and the red, brown Nazgul. They're afraid of you. They hate you. That's who they hate. These middle-class intellectuals, the New York intellectuals, the Trotskyite to neocon pipeline, they hate you. That is what they hate. They hate you. And they are afraid. They are afraid. I see you. I see you. They are afraid that someday we'll have a government in the United States that feels accountable to us and kicks the ass of rich people in Beverly Hills and forces the economy to work in our interests. And that's what they are very, very terrified of. And that is what you need to understand about these folks. Now, I've got just one more thing to talk about before I end my opening remarks, but it's a long thing. It's a long thing. It's a long thing, not a short thing, but I'm going to talk about it. And thank you for all the super chats that keep coming in. I've written most of them down, and yeah. The Boston Trap is, PSL, the Party of Socialism and Liberation. They are generally considered to be a tanky party. They support the Syrian Arab Republic against the attacks on them. They want peace on the Korean Peninsula, and they're against the attacks on North Korea. But they took a very bad stand on the trucker convoy. Yes, that's true, I believe. A very bad stand on the trucker convoy, condemning the trucker convoy making ridiculous excuses. Well, they're right wing. Well, no shit, you know. Oh, they're funded by billionaires. Well, so is Black Lives Matter. So are all kinds of movements. Does that mean you don't support them? They took a very bad stand on the trucker convoy. And now the latest is they have taken a horrendous, like, plague on both your houses stand on the Ukraine situation. Their position is basically, well, okay, sure, NATO may have, provoked this situation, but Putin is still a mass murderer. Putin's still corrupt. They're taking awful stances, right? They're trying to have it both ways, right? They see NATO and U.S. imperialism bombarding the people of East Ukraine. They see Russia moving in to protect the people of Eastern Ukraine. And their position is, Putin said bad things about Lenin. And, Russia has a lot of rich people and corruption. And why are they doing this? They're doing this because of the Boston trap. And this is what you need to understand, right? And this is very interesting. See, I used to be in the Workers' World Party, right? Workers' World Party, the PSL is a split from the Workers' World Party in 2004. I used to be in it. Yes, Jeffrey Sachs has changed his political angle. All right. Yeah, I used to be in the Workers' World Party. And one of the most important moments of the Workers' World Party was in Boston in 1974. 1974 in Boston, there was a string of racist riots. And they were awful against school busing. So what happened was that, the Supreme Court basically said you have to integrate schools. And, you can't have school segregation like they did in the South, where it's black schools and white schools. But they went a little bit further, and they said on top of that, you can't have de facto segregation either. You can't have some schools for the black community and some schools for the white community, because statistically, the schools in the black community are going to get less funding. They're going to be, less high quality schools. And so to make education fair in urban centers of the United States, like Boston, like Detroit, like Cleveland, they launched a policy of school busing. And the idea was that people would not, children would not go to schools in their neighborhood. They would rather go to schools throughout the city. And as a result of that, you wouldn't have black schools and white schools. You wouldn't have racial segregation in education. That was the policy, school busing program. And it was a way to break down the inequality in education. So in response to that, you had a number. It was Boston was the most intense place. You had it. Thank you very much, Troy. Boston was the most intense, but across the country, you had a wave of racism. And in Boston, school buses were blown up. And there's a famous photograph of a right-wing anti-busing activist spearing a black man with his American flag. He has like a pole with an American flag on it. And he's spearing a black man. It was a racist mobilization. It was a racist mobilization, and it was Irish Catholics, Italians. You have these ethnic communities, Polish folks. You have these ethnic communities in Boston. You have these ethnic communities in New York City and in Cleveland and in Pittsburgh and a lot of urban centers. You have these ethnic communities that tend to be Roman Catholic. They tend to be white, and they kind of hold on to their traditions from Ireland or from Poland or from Italy. And these ethnic communities are very close-knit, and telling folks from a traditionally Polish or a traditionally Irish neighborhood that are Roman Catholic that you need to send, you can't have your kids go to a school with only Polish people and only Irish people. They're going to have to go to school with black people. A lot of those folks were racist. They were just straight up racist. And there was a clip, I believe there's a woman from Boston who said, they asked her why she was out there, and she said, I don't want my kids to go to school with, the N-word. I mean, it was a racist mobilization. It was a disgusting racist mobilization. The anti-busing campaign was purely about racism, right? And that's when you had Republicans started pandering to the racists with code words. They talked about quote unquote forced busing. They called it forced busing, and the idea was that it sounds bad, forced busing, right? Forcing someone to get on a bus, that's not good. But everyone knew it was really, when they said forced busing, they meant having your children go to school with people of other races, right? It was like a racist code term. So there was this right-wing mobilization against busing that was awful, and there were murders, and it was a horrendous thing. And it was a lot of these Irish, Polish, Italian, white ethnic communities in urban centers who didn't want their kids to go to school with people of other races, were committing horrendous hate crimes. It was just a really, really awful, awful thing. And so in the middle of that, you had a confused reaction from some communist groups, because some of these communist groups were smart enough. This was the 70s. They were still in touch. They remembered the 1930s CP, and they realized that they needed to get to average working people. They realized that average working people were going to make the revolution, that you couldn't just, be organizing hippies and such. And so the Revolutionary Communist Party, I think they were called the Revolutionary Union, the Bobavakian people, before they were the Revolutionary Communist Party, they were called the Revolutionary Union, the RU. They said, well, wait a second. Busing is not going to get rid of racism. Communism is the only way to get rid of racism. And these are working class people. These are working class people who are mobilizing against busing. So maybe we can be against busing too. Not a good call. And their logic was basically, okay, we're against busing because the only answer is communist revolution. And they're against busing because they're racist. So we can join their racist protests and rallies and try to recruit the people there to be communists. Bad idea. I believe the RCP, they had an infamous, cover of their newspaper that said, organized to smash busing. And they basically joined a racist mobilization. Well, that's disgusting. You can't do that. And then there was another communist group called the October League. And they noticed that it wasn't just the racist white people that were against busing, but black people, black nationalists were also against busing. The Nation of Islam was against busing. They wanted black schools for black children. The Black Panthers were against busing. Again, they wanted black schools for black children. So the October League said, okay, we're not going to, say smash busing, but we're just going to say we support black nationalism, and we're going to highlight the black nationalists. Well, most of the black community were not black nationalists at that time. Most of the black community wanted their kids to go to the highest quality school they could possibly get. And most of the black community supported busing. However, there was a minority of nationalists who didn't. But because of that, you had some communists try to say, well, we support black nationalism, so we can be against busing. Well, and then you had some, like the Communist Party, that just straight up supported the liberal position. They said, well, the Democrats are for busing good. And then the Socialist Workers' Party, the Trotskyites, they said, oh, well, liberals, busing is good, and the liberals and the Democrats are for busing, so I guess we're for busing. Well, the Workers' World Party, they supported black nationalism, but they recognized that most black people supported busing. The nationalists didn't, but the majority of the black community did support school busing. And they realized that the anti-busing protests were racist, were disgusting and racist. So in 1974, the Workers' World Party organized a huge protest in Boston. And the slogan that they used was, "We say no to racism." And it was just a big mobilization to counter the racist anti-busing riots. And it was very successful. And like 20,000 people came, and Democratic Party politicians spoke at the rally, and they concealed the fact that they were in the Workers' World Party, and they made it just a single issue march. We say no to racism. And that's what happened. And that was one of the most successful things the Workers' World Party ever did. And so in that moment, what they take from that is whenever there's a right-wing mobilization, never make excuses to join it. That's the way it was always told. Look at the RCP. They made excuses to join this racist mobilization. Look at the October League. They made excuses to join this racist mobilization. But instead, and then look at the Communist Party. They just wanted to support the Democrats. But we mobilized to fight the right wing. That was their take. We mobilized to fight the right wing, and look how successful we are. That's what they take from it. And so according to their logic, with their minds stuck in 1974, you would never support the trucker convoy because it's right wing. You would never support anything that is quote unquote right wing because then that puts you on the side of the racists. And instead, you should try to be the stage managers of liberal rallies. That's how they think. And they're wrong. They're wrong because it's not 1974. 1974, the reason that you had all this racism among white workers, number one, was because there was still a very big, prosperous U.S. economy, right? Compared to the way the U.S. economy is now, there was a lot more economic opportunity. It was a lot easier to get a job. It was a lot easier to buy a house. College, going to college cost barely anything. It was a much better time economically for most people, especially for most white workers in the United States. Plus, at that time, being a liberal, part of being a liberal at that time meant that you were somewhat sympathetic to the Soviet Union. It meant that you were somewhat sympathetic to the civil rights movement. It meant you were somewhat sympathetic to the peace movement, that you didn't want to escalate the arms race against the USSR. Being a liberal meant that you were less fanatically anti-communist than right-wingers were. And it meant that you were more sympathetic to causes that communists had led, like the struggle against racism, like the protest movement against the Vietnam War, than conservatives were. Nowadays, everything is topsy-turvy. Liberals are more pro-war than conservatives are. Look at it. Who's speaking up against this war hysteria against Russia? Marjorie Taylor Greene is. Candace Owens is saying pretty good things, comparatively speaking, about this conflict. So conservatives are more critical of the U.S. establishment and critical of foreign policy. Meanwhile, the mobilizations among workers who are right-wing are not racist, right? I mean, there are racist elements. There's anti-immigrant bigotry in the Trump movement, sure. And that was a big part of what Trump was about. Trump certainly said many racist and anti-Islamic and anti-immigrant things. That's true. But the trucker convoy wasn't racist. There may have been racists there. And yeah, some Nazis showed up with flags, but there were a lot of drivers who weren't white who were part of it. There were a lot of Sikh drivers who were part of that trucker convoy. It was against vaccinations. It was against the vaccine mandates. And dirty little secret that no liberal will ever tell you, there is a much higher percentage of unvaccinated people among the black community than among the white community. The idea that right-wingers are all, white supremacists, that the modern, conservatives are the equivalent of those racist mobs in Boston in 1974 is wrong. Meanwhile, the idea that the liberals are the equivalent of the kind of people that would have gone to the Workers' World Party's We Say No to Racism march is also wrong. Liberals want war with Russia. They're out marching for a no-fly zone. They want World War III. Conservatives are going, shouldn't we put America first? What is Ukraine's business? I think Trump said it's a European problem. Liberals, if you get up and say, hey, I think this was started by NATO, what do they say? They say, that's a conspiracy theory. You're a right-winger. Oh, that's propaganda. And conservatives say, oh, is there something to that? Folks, this isn't the same political ballpark that we had during the Cold War. It's just not. It is not the same political ballpark that we had between the Cold War. I'll write that down. Nowadays, the so-called left is a mobilization to defend the establishment, whereas the right wing are people that, for whatever reason, are at odds with the establishment, often for very, not so good reasons. The establishment, they're promoting, they want an open international system. They want to, drive wages down, etc. So they're more sympathetic to immigration. Well, you have these right-wing nationalist types, a lot of whom are racist, who are like, no, put up a wall, keep the immigrants out. Well, that's bad, but it puts them at odds with the establishment. But a lot of them are just critical of the mainstream. A lot of them think that the government can't be trusted. A lot of them think that the ruling class are evil and they might even be satanic pedophiles. I mean, I obviously don't endorse QAnon, but a lot of right-wing people are critical of the status quo. Liberals, on the other hand, are people that say that if you don't agree with CNN, That's a conspiracy theory. You should be silenced. You should be banned from social media. You're spreading Russian propaganda. What? You don't want a no-fly zone in Ukraine? That means that you must be a Nazi. I mean, that's liberals are the neocons. During the Iraq War, this is how the Bush people used to talk. If you said, Saddam Hussein and Osama bin Laden are not the same, they're like, shut up. That's a conspiracy theory. That's how the liberals talk now. It's really unbelievable. And, a lot of these conservatives are just people that are like, hey, I don't trust Big Pharma. Shouldn't we ask more questions about this vaccine? And the establishment, the defenders of the establishment say, silence! You're spreading conspiracy theories. You must be working for the Russians. Put him in jail. He's not allowed to ask that question. That's the liberals. And conservatives now are people that are like, is it really our business to get involved in Ukraine? And they're like, you're not supporting the fight of the Ukrainian people for freedom against evil Putin? Where's your patriotism, you traitor? Put him in jail for questioning the war with Russia. That's the liberals now. You can't support the liberals. The liberals are the enemy at this point. The liberals are the enemy, and the conservatives are confused. They're confused. A lot of them are racist. A lot of them are sexist. But they're confused. And on the right, I can have a conversation about these issues without getting beaten up. I can have I'm not on the right, but I'm saying that you can talk to people in right-wing spaces. You can talk to people in right-wing spaces at this point. It didn't used to be that way. It used to be in right-wing spaces, if you said anything about socialism or Marxism or definitely anything questioning U.S. foreign policy, your life was in danger. You got beaten up. No, now it's that way in liberal circles. Now, if Whoopi Goldberg wants anybody, you, me, anyone who talks about these biolabs that the Pentagon has been building in Ukraine, she wants anyone who mentions that to go to jail. Have you seen that clip where Whoopi Goldberg, she actually said that, didn't they used to arrest people for repeating Russian propaganda? I mean, liberals are the sick fascist cult that U.S. imperialism is using at this point. Thank you. I've been observing this phenomenon in Brooklyn and Long Beach, California for a decade. The establishment left is the new right wing. Exactly, Jerry. And so that means that, we got to learn to talk to people on the right. And if working class people, or people that are, truckers are having a demonstration against vaccine mandates, and they're spewing all kinds of crazy anti-communism and delusional conspiracy theories, we got to go there and talk to them and win them to socialism and Marxism. Oh, Og Smash. That's what we got to do. That's what we got to do. And we got to find a way to win folks. And at the end of the day, it's not about building the movement. It's not about advancing the struggle. It's about the program. It's about our program. It's about building a socialist society. It's about implementing transitional demands, mass reconstruction of the country, public ownership of oil and natural gas and natural resources, public control of our banking system, an economic bill of rights. It's about mobilizing society around economic demands. It's about building a mass movement for a government of action that fights for working families. That's what it's about, folks. That's what it's about. It's about ripping their global imperialist monopolist system to shreds and mobilizing working people to fight for their own interests against the elite, against the ruling class. That's what it's about. It's not about starting a pencil co-op with your friends. It's not about feeling so woke and so progressive. And no, it's about moving toward a rationally planned economy where the banks, factories, and industries are organized to serve the people and not the profits of a wealthy few. Socialism is about the means of production being organized to serve society. It's about eliminating the irrationality of the market. That's what socialism is about. And it looks like right now, the liberals are the ones that want to destroy that. They want to destroy it in China. They want to destroy it in Venezuela. They want to destroy it in Cuba. They want to destroy it anywhere. And conservatives are people that are confused, just absolutely and utterly confused, and are at odds with the new woke fascism that's coming to dominate U.S. society, right? And so we need to reorient ourselves out of the movement to the masses. It's about winning the broad masses to socialism. We don't want to get caught in the Boston trap. We don't want to get caught in the Boston trap, right? It's not 1974. working class people who voted for Trump or, got confused into supporting QAnon are not the same as that racist mob in Boston in 1974. And the movement, that marched in 1974 in Boston, the We Say No to Racism march, they're not the same either. The people who want you and me put in jail for questioning this war are not the same. They're not the same. We need to get out of the Boston trap, and we need to get out of the movement and get to the masses. All right, folks, those are my opening remarks. I'm glad you listened. And now we'll do the roll call here for a little bit, and then I'll start answering super chats until we're done. That's how it's going to roll. That is how it's going to roll. So hit the like button, hit the subscribe button, hit the notifications bell, and I am going to start answering your super chat question. I'm going to first start doing the roll call. So names and locations, who's with us? We got Cleveland Pirate Alex is with us, right? Cleveland Pirate Alex. We got Dylan in California, Ryan, Preston, Haya, David Rennie in Ontario. We got Shia, great fan of the program in Montreal. Micah in Las Vegas, Max the Sax in Virginia, JT24 in Mississippi, Kendall in San Diego, Bob Troy in New York, Temple City, Lexington, Kentucky, Nate Pano, Nate from Chicago, Ben in Denver. We got Palmer in Washington State, Marissa Palmer in Washington State, Pomona, California. We got Kinky. We got Kevin from San Diego, Clydebank, New Jersey. We got Dallas, Texas, Isaiah Madrigal. Shout out to you. We got Michael in Boston. We got Daniel in Round Rock. We got Adam in Salt Lake City. We got SLC, Salt Lake City, Utah. Norman Vaughn in Australia. We got Nick in California, Metal Nick. We got Cairo, Egypt. Andrew from Kiev. We got Kieran from San Diego. David in Seattle. We got Upper Peninsula, Michigan. We got the outskirts of Edinburgh. We got Montana, Bayonne, New Jersey, Auckland, New Zealand. And I think we got another super chat from Morpheus. Thank you very much. Daniel in Seattle, Scooter from Donbass, San Diego County, California, Balthazar in Oakland, Pasadena, Texas, Andy T from Mom's Box, Greensboro, North Carolina, Dario from Brooklyn, Greensboro, North Carolina, Neil Fraser in Hong Kong. Shout out to you. All right. Shout out to you. Tucson, Northern Washington. Shout out to all of you. Wow, this is great. We got Greg from China, South Korea, Alan Rice. Wow. Wow, folks. We got dog sauce. Dog sauce. Great, great dog sauce. We got Mohsin from Iran, Moog Scythe from Cleveland. Great stuff. Anthony from Detroit, William from Montana. All right, folks. So glad. Connor from Brooklyn, Chris from Salt Lake City, Sydney, Connor, New Jersey, Somalia, Brisbane, Australia, Nicaragua, Cincinnati, Jenny Lynn, great friend of the program. Jose from Caracas, Long Beach, California. All right. John McCarthy in Chicago. Leslie from Sydney. Jerry Ramiro from Long Beach. You know me. Thanks, Caleb. Good stuff, folks. Good stuff. All right, folks. Now we are going to start answering super chat questions. Let me pour some more water. And we're going to start answering those super chat questions. So keep them rolling in, folks. That's what I'm here to do, is answer your questions. First question. What do I think of Justice William O. Douglas? Don't know enough about that. Don't know enough about it. Next question. Are the PDFs of my book available for free? No, they are not. No, they are not. And the reason for that is that I basically look. We got Michael from Ithaca. Shout out to Michael from Ithaca. Alan, Pierre from Montreal. But the reason that my books are not available, as PDFs is because I want people who buy my books to be people who actually want to read them. If the PDF goes out and the ebook is available, there will be a number of my detractors who will get their hands on it, and they will word shit. A million of these people who have no idea. It's kind of like that clip I played for you of Vosh earlier. They see the clip, they will clip little sentences out and say, "Oh, this means this, and that makes Caleb an idiot," and that's how these people argue. So I want my books to be for people that actually want to pay for them. If you're willing to pay $14 or whatever, $8 or whatever the hell my book costs, that's probably because you actually want to read it. And that's good. And that, I want to put another layer there. I don't want there to be some PDF floating around that people can just get their hands on, and then they can take things out of context, they can word search it, they can play games. I want people to actually buy my book, open it up, and read it. Now, I do put audiobooks online. Charlotte did an amazing audiobook of the Kamala Harris book, and I'm actually about to post chapter 2 of BreadTube Serves Imperialism. Great audiobook that Connor and I believe is it Jason Connor and Sophia? They're both doing great audiobooks of the BreadTube book. So that's coming out. I'm about to post chapter 2 of the BreadTube book. That'll go up later tonight as soon as this stream is over. So I'm all for the audiobooks, but I just don't want there to be, I want to make it harder for these people that want to attack me. Look, I mean, there are a number of people who they buy my books, and they do streams where they read from my books, and then they go, oh, that's retarded, and say it means things it doesn't mean. Not that I can really do about that, but I want to make it harder for them. Make them actually buy the book, right, is the idea. Make them actually buy it, all right? Make them actually pay for a physical copy of the book in order to, to do their hate distortions and all of that, right? Because if there's just a Word file or an ebook, they can word search it, and then they can come up with their hate. And I don't want to give them that opportunity, right? If you want to see what's in my books, get a copy of my books, right? Come to an event, right? We just had a great conference. I think we almost ran out of books. I think a lot of the books we brought lots of books to that conference, and they sold out, a lot of them. And, we're doing other conferences. Come to an event, or order them online, or if you want to buy my copies of my books in bulk, just contact me directly. I can give you a bulk rate if you're starting a reading group. I know a lot of people around the country at this point, in so many different cities, there are CPI reading groups that have started. In Chicago, there's one. In Seattle, there's one. In Southern California, there's one. I mean, there are just Texas, San Angelo Solidarity folks are doing one. And all over the country, people are having these reading groups. So if you want to start a reading group and you want a bulk rate, I can ship them to you for much cheaper. So, just send me an email, calebmaupin@gmail.com. If you want a bulk rate, we got the CPI educational manual. We've got the green book. We got books, and we want to print lots of books. So there you go. All right. Next question. Economic shock therapy in Russia in the 1990s. Well, if you want actual statistics on it, I would recommend a great place to start would be Naomi Klein's book, The Shock Doctrine. Another good book that's very, very good on this topic is Europe Since 1989 by Philip Fair. But yeah, it gets into great detail about these things. I believe during the 1990s, 80% of the collective farms, the farms in Russia went bankrupt. 80,000 factories closed their doors. You had something between 20 and 30% unemployment. That is a huge rate of unemployment. Sex trafficking went through the roof. Drug use and organized crime went through the roof. I mean, the economy of Russia was devastated by the fall of the Soviet Union. And it was Putin who got shit together. I mean, he came in and he restructured the economy to be once again centered around state-controlled oil and gas, and he got things together. That's why Putin is so popular in Russia, is because he fixed it from the crisis of free market neoliberal policies. And there's a lot of respect for him for that. Putin's not a Marxist, he's not a socialist, but he fixed the economy of Russia, and he got out of the nightmare of free market neoliberal capitalism. And that's why he's widely loved and respected. What else? I mean, there was, during the 1990s, I believe, according to this book, roughly 10% of the population either left the country or died. A lot of people just left Russia. They couldn't live there anymore. There were a number of people who died also. And that Andre Gunder Frank, who's a well-respected academic economist, the term that he used to describe what was done to Russia during this period, he used the term economic genocide. That's what it was described as, economic genocide. I think I'm going to get this camera a little bit closer here. I'm going to turn it a little bit closer. Is that how we can do that? Or how does this work? Oh, there we go. All righty. All right. Under Gunter Frank, he called it economic genocide, what was done to Russia during this time period. I mean, it was a disaster. And it was just, they were selling off state industries to the highest bidder. People who'd had guaranteed jobs and guaranteed health care and guaranteed education were suddenly, struggling to survive and out on their own. They talk about, there's one writer I heard who talked about how there would be elderly people by the subways, trying to sell you their clothes or sell you like yesterday's newspapers so they could eat. It was a nightmare. Thank you so much for keeping the red flag flying and telling the truth where it matters. Well, you're very, very welcome. Very, very welcome. It was an economic disaster, the fall of the Soviet Union. That's pretty well documented fact. And yes, George Soros was heavily involved in it. Thank you, Norman. George Soros was heavily involved in it. And yes, I mean, the Soviet Union obviously had problems. There were, aspects of the Soviet Union, which we'll probably get into later because of some of the questions we've already got. There were certainly problems with the Soviet Union that contributed to its demise, but there you go. Vatican imperialism. That's the question. The person asked, should we call it Vatican imperialism? No, we should not. The Vatican, the Catholic Church is an institution. The Catholic Church tends to follow the interests of the French, German, and Italian capitalists. It's somewhat, it's less in line with the United States and less in line with Britain, but more in line with, like Western European capital wants. The Vatican is an illiberal institution, but I wouldn't call it Vatican imperialism. I mean, they tend to be aligned with, the NATO countries and Western imperialism, but not exactly. I mean, the Catholic Church has kind of zigged and zagged on its foreign policy stances, right? I mean, officially, it's not supposed to have a foreign policy stance, but, right after the Second World War in the 50s, the Vatican was in an anti-communist frenzy. I mean, communism was the main enemy, kill a commie for Christ, it was Catholics around the world were being mobilized to fight communism. But then in the 1960s, after Vatican II, in the Vatican II documents, there's a condemnation of the bombing of civilian areas, which is interpreted as a condemnation of the activities of the United States during the Korean War, but also a condemnation of some of the actions of the Allies during the Second World War. But there's a lot of anti-militarism in Vatican II. And starting in the 1960s, the Catholic Church gradually more and more turned against the Vietnam War. You had a lot of Catholic priests who protested the Vietnam War. Father Roy Bourgeois, I believe that's the name that comes up. It's ironic, his name's Bourgeois, but he was Father Roy Bourgeois. And I believe there were some other Catholic priests who were arrested, for supporting draft resistance, etc. And then, in the 70s and especially in the 80s, you did see the Catholic Church go all in with the anti-nuclear movement and the nuclear disarmament protests. And in Nicaragua, there were Catholic priests who served in the Sandinista government in Nicaragua, whereas the United States was supporting the Contras. And in Central America at that time, the Catholic Church was deemed to be a treasonous element, right, by the fanatical anti-communist extremists. The Contras, basically, they were all evangelicals. Rios Montt, the military dictator of Guatemala, was not a Catholic. He was an evangelical because he thought the Catholic Church was soft on communism. Right? In the School of the Americas, a lot of the hard right-wing extremists of Central America were anti-Catholic, and they executed priests and nuns. And you had Oscar Romero, who was in El Salvador, who was a Catholic priest who was sympathetic to socialism and such. And you had liberation theology in Latin America, which the Vatican never fully endorsed, but it was clear that the Vatican in the 80s was not fully on board with U.S. imperialism. And I actually wrote an extensive article about the geopolitics of the Vatican because, again, the Vatican tends to follow the capitalists of the European mainland. But that may be changing soon because we now have a situation where the majority of Roman Catholics in the world are not in Europe. The majority of Roman Catholics in the world are not white at this point. There are more Roman Catholics in South America, in Africa, and in Asia than there are in Europe. And Europe has largely secularized at this point. Church attendance in Europe is very low. But in Africa, a lot of people are still very, very religious. In South America, people are very, very religious. In Asia, people are very, very religious. And so the Catholic Church may be shifting. Now, someone in the chat's mentioning the Catholic worker movement. That's a U.S. phenomenon. That's Dorothy Day, who was kind of a pacifist and a utopian socialist who started a a kind of pacifist Christian socialistic, movement that's still around. They have the Catholic worker houses in Cleveland. They used to always do the peace show, which was to counter the military air show they did in Cleveland every year. And they exist, the Catholic worker movement, the Catholic worker houses, kind of a religious pacifist movement that exists. That's not big international. That's more of a U.S. phenomenon. And Dorothy Day, she wasn't exactly a good Catholic, right? She entered the Catholic Church because she believed in there being one church for all Christians, but a lot of her personal beliefs were somewhat at odds with the majority of the Catholic Church, from what I understand. I don't actually know that much about Catholic worker movement. I've met them a million times. I mean, it used to be if you went to any anti-war rally or anything, you would meet these people. But, there you go. I mean, I wouldn't use the term Vatican imperialism. And in fact, the notion that the Vatican is some kind of entity that's trying to conquer the world that was something that the Ku Klux Klan pushed during the 1920s. The KKK was always pushing the idea that there was some kind of papist conspiracy of the Vatican to take over the United States. The 1920s, the Ku Klux Klan was really obsessively demonizing Roman Catholics because a lot of the immigrants to the United States from Ireland, from Italy, were Roman Catholic. And part of the reason that prohibition was passed, little known fact, is because Catholics drink, right? At the time, Protestants, and this is really interesting because nowadays all Christians tend to drink, but back in the day, in the 1920s, Catholics were allowed to drink alcohol, right? Thank you. I appreciate that. Catholics were allowed to drink alcohol, but a lot of Protestant churches pushed temperance. 6 years of lies from our media, and now the cherry on top of the Ukraine war. How does the Western public not see through this? Are we a lost cause? All right. Does the Western public not see through this? Are we a lost cause? All right. And thank you, Kulk, for your solidarity for our conference. It was a smashing success, and there'll be many more coming. But it was Catholics drank alcohol, and so the feeling among a lot of the rural farmers and Protestant folks, and a lot of the Southern, folks, and the Midwestern Ku Klux Klan, a lot of the Ku Klux Klan people were saying all these immigrants are coming to our country, and they drink, and we can't have alcohol, and so prohibition was added to the U.S. Constitution as a way to counter the inflow of Roman Catholic immigrants, which is interesting. And then it was largely repealed during the 1930s. The Roosevelt administration repealed it. There was a constitutional amendment to repeal prohibition. So it's some interesting history. But no, I wouldn't talk about Vatican imperialism. Now, the Vatican is very much tied in with imperialism, et cetera. Absolutely. And I mean, you're right. It's not an anti-imperialist institution by any means. But at the same time, there are times it goes back and forth. It doesn't always directly serve the U.S. imperialists. It's more in line with Central Europe, with Germany, with France, etc. All right, next question. Will Putin be tried in The Hague? No, that won't happen. Will not happen. No. Putin is wildly popular in Russia. There's a lot of support for Putin among the population. I believe his approval rating is like 71%. The military is with Putin. The security services are with Putin, and that will never happen. Maybe if World War III happens and 2/3 of the human race dies, but somehow, the United States is victorious in World War III after all the nukes go off, maybe something like that could happen, but I really doubt that. World War III would happen before that would happen. Yeah, it's not going to happen. Not going to happen. And the fact that they're calling for that is utterly ridiculous. I mean, it just shows you how utterly ridiculous all of this is. And I will say, PSL, they're at least trying to be neutral. The Party of Socialism and Liberation, they're at least trying to be neutral. They're trying to be like, okay, well, NATO's bad, but that's a punk line, but it's better than this Liberation Road. I don't know if people ever heard of Liberation Road. Liberation Road is this disgusting organization of Maoists who all work in NGOs. They are calling for they're defend Ukraine. This schmuck Carl Davidson is calling for like a people's war in Ukraine. And it really shocks me. Like, there are these people that are just like the most moderate people ever. Vote for the Democrats. Vote for the Democrats. Vote for the Democrats. get a job at a liberal NGO, tone it down, vote for the Democrat, those kind of people. But the second that there is some group that the CIA is arming, they suddenly sound like crazy radicals, right? The same people that are like, vote for the Democrats, campaign for Bernie. The second that the CIA was arming the Kurds, like the CIA is giving guns to the Kurds in Syria, all of a sudden they're like wearing like black masks on their faces and they're like, revolution, man, war. God. And I'm just like, wait a second. And now Carl Davidson, this old burned out Maoist, who's the most lame, boring, vote for the Democrats. Suddenly, now U.S. imperialism is arming the Azov battalion and Ukrainian nationalists and, who admire, Hitler collaborators and stuff. And all of a sudden he's like, we got to have a people's war. These people get radical. They get radical the second U.S. imperialism tells them it's okay. It's disgusting. It's utterly disgusting. Right? I mean, if the only time you can support a revolution is when the CIA does, you're scum. Okay? I can't get up. I mean, it's like so ridiculous. These people who are just the most lame, vote for the Democrats, get a job at a liberal NGO. But the second U.S. imperialism is handing guns to the Kurds, whoa, revolution, man, I'm going to put on a mask and people's war. And the second U.S. imperialism is arming the Azov battalion, yeah, people's war in Ukraine, revolution. These people are scum. And, PSL is lame and the Plague on Both Your Houses people are lame, but these ones are the worst. They are absolutely the worst. The ones that get radical, and the second U.S. imperialism does, that are usually telling us to tone, that are like, oh, just, these are the most reformist, lame, Liberation Road, this group of stupid Maoists who work at NGOs, the most lame, liberal, academic, these are the people that write like 3-page books on transgender theory and the influence of obscure anarchists in Europe. They're the most boring group of people. But suddenly, U.S. imperialism is arming Nazis in Ukraine, and they sound like revolutionaries. We must defend Ukraine. These people are scum. They are pro-imperialist scum. And they want me dead. Let's be real about that. And they want you dead, too. I mean, they think any of us who defend the people of Donetsk and Lugansk and think that maybe war with Russia is not a bad thing. They think that we're the equivalent of the Nazis. They want us locked up. These people are our enemies. Look, let's just be real about this, okay? That, and these people are not, it's one thing to say we're wrong, right? You can think we're wrong. I'll forgive you for thinking I'm wrong. If you think I'm wrong about Ukraine, fine. If you take a neutral position about Ukraine, fine. But if you take the position that I am a Nazi, I'm the equivalent of Adolf Hitler because I'm opposing Nazis in Ukraine, and you support the U.S. government in locking me in jail, you are my enemy. If you want me to go to jail because I work at RT or because I want to talk about biolabs and because I support Tulsi Gabbard bringing up the biolabs, you are my enemy. Okay, I'll just be real about that. It's one thing, you can disagree with me all day. I don't want you to go to jail. You can disagree with me about Ukraine, and I'll tell you you're wrong, and we'll argue. I don't want you to go to jail, right? I don't want to put you in prison. I don't want to exterminate you just because you don't go along with me. But these people, that's what they want to do to us. I mean, look at social media. They want to murder us, folks. I mean, I'm not exaggerating. You should see the tweets that we get. These people literally want to kill us because, when we were out protesting, when we were out protesting at the demonstration that happened on Sunday, this crazy guy from Uzbekistan, he was ready to attack me. Nick and Joe had my back. Thank God for Nick and Joe. But, this guy was ready to violently assault me out on the street because we were marching in support of Russia and defending the intervention in Russia. Listen to what Whoopi Goldberg said of it. They used to put people in jail for what Tulsi Gabbard's doing. These people, the synthetic left, they are fascists. They are fascists. They want us dead because we don't buy into the propaganda about Russia. Okay? Let's just be real about it. They want us dead. They want us locked in jail. They would support the government going after us. They would report us to the FBI. And if we can't say that these people are, if there's not a time to get out of the movement and get to the masses, what is there? At the point that the left is rallying to support the fascist Azov battalion and having rallies dumping out Russian vodka. I mean, if there's not a time to say out of the movement to the masses, I don't know what is. I mean, and that's why we got to just dump the wokeness, and we got to get to average Americans, and we got to start preaching socialism in a way that people can understand it, for goodness sakes. And that's what patriotic socialism is about: out of the movement to the masses. And we got to break with the synthetic left. So there you go. There you go. All right. Next question. All right. Did I go on Jimmy Dore? I was supposed to, and as you saw, he had technical difficulties, and he was very disappointed. I was very disappointed. I'm very excited to go on Jimmy Dore. I was all set. I was sitting there, and I could see him, and we were talking, but technically, I could see the technical difficulties that were happening. And when his internet and the technical difficulties are resolved, I'll go on Jimmy Dore. But I wasn't able to go on, and that's fine. I hope it happens soon. I love Jimmy Dore. It was a bit of a disappointment, but that happens. You know, these things happen. I don't take it personally. It's not his fault, you know, and it's not my fault either. It's just these things happen. These are bizarre times. A lot of strange things are happening with computers and stuff right now. Years from now, we'll know exactly what was just random technical difficulties and what was the government. At this point, it's not worth speculating about, but you know, I mean, I'm sure I'll be back on as soon as he gets things working, you know, and I'd rather do an interview with Jimmy that works and doesn't get cut off and freeze every 2 seconds than one that's like all choppy and bad. So, you know, hey, I mean, I hope I can be back on soon. Someone's asking me about a Martin Luther King memorial in China. I am not aware of that. I do know that Mao made 2 statements supporting Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. One was made in support of the 1963 March on Washington, where Dr. Martin Luther King gave his I Have a Dream speech. The second was made after Dr. Martin Luther King Jr.'s assassination. If you watch my class, Mao and American Socialists, I talk about that in great detail, actually. Yeah, I mean, you know, there you go. But I'm not aware about the monument being built in China right now. Interesting. What compels a person to virtue signal? Okay, interesting. All right. What compels a person to virtue signal? All right. Source material on threats on Zelensky. There's plenty of it out there. And in fact, I mean, the Azov Battalion and the ultra-nationalists in Ukraine, they've been having, you know, demonstrations against Zelensky, calling for his overthrow, you know, calling for a new Euromaidan to topple him. I mean, when Poroshenko was out and Zelensky was in, at that point, there have been torchlit marches against Zelensky, where the Azov Battalion folks have been calling for his removal. That has happened. So, I mean, it's not simply like, you know, there was just like a message that was passed. They have rallies calling for new revolutions against it. They've been doing that since Zelensky was in office. So there you go. I mean, look into the history. RT would always show them. The world tries to ignore them because they don't want to feed into the reality of what the Azov Battalion and the Ukrainian ultra-nationalists are. But yeah, RT, we always showed the video of those rallies, and they would march, and you know, and their protests and the torchlit rallies these Ukrainian fascists would have. They would threaten Zelensky at those rallies. The Narodniks, why did they fail? The Narodniks were a revolutionary movement in Russia. I believe their name translates to like peopleists or friends of the people. Some people translate it as populists, but that's not correct. The Narodniks were a socialist movement, but they were not a Marxist movement. Marxism believes that the industrial working class, the proletariat, will be the leaders of the revolution. The Narodniks, on the other hand, they argued it would be the peasantry seizing control of their land, and the fight of the peasantry for land that would be the basis of a revolution in Russia. And I believe the Narodniks, they formed the Social Revolutionary Party. And I believe Peter Kropotkin, the author of that book, The Conquest of Bread, he was kind of the ideologue of the Narodniks. And they were a political tendency before Marxism emerged. They were older than Marxism, and they were fighting for the peasantry. A lot of them even dressed in costumes as if they were peasants, you know, and they were wealthy intellectuals, students of the middle class who tried to organize the peasantry. And they would dress up like peasants, pretend to be poor peasants, and try to agitate the peasants. They also built like farm cooperatives, if I'm not mistaken, They would buy up pieces of land and try to start like, cooperative farms that would be a model of their thing. A lot of people refer to the Narodniks as anarchists, which I think is interesting. And I mean, Peter Kropotkin was certainly an anarchist, but and that shows you that the differences between a Marxist and an anarchist. Like nowadays, the differences are quite different. But at that time, if you went to Spain during the Spanish Civil War, the main difference between the anarchists and the Marxists was that the anarchists wanted to organize the peasantry and the Marxists wanted to organize the factory workers. Nowadays there aren't many peasants, and the differences between these political tendencies are quite different. Interestingly, Mao in China was a follower of Peter Kropotkin before he became a Marxist. He was the leader of something called the New People's Study Group, and they were Kropotkinist anarchists. And it wasn't until the founding of the Chinese Communist Party and that Mao became sympathetic to Marxism, because Mao saw that China had a peasant majority. And ultimately, it was that peasant majority that was the basis of Mao's communist revolution. So Mao's position of organizing the peasantry in a weird way might have made Mao a Narodnik, right? If Mao had put forward those politics in China during the put those politics in Russia before the Russian Revolution, he probably would have been a Narodnik because he was organizing the peasantry. But ultimately, the Chinese Revolution, the bulk of the fighters were peasants. And that's why Trotsky denounced the Chinese Revolution. Because it was largely a peasant-led revolution, and it was about the peasants' struggle for land, right? Land to the tiller was the rallying cry of the Chinese Revolution, and that's not socialist, right? That's a struggle to obtain property, right? It's the aspiration of the peasantry to become petty bourgeois, to be to own their own land, right? And that's one way that you could argue that Mao broke with classical Marxism. But Mao understood it. One of the most important essays that Mao ever wrote is Report on an Investigation into the Peasant Uprisings in Hunan. It's published in 1926, and I've quoted it over and over again. Those who've been downtrodden in the dirt have now lifted up their heads, and in doing so, they are inspiring all of China to rise. A revolution is not a dinner party or painting an embroidery or writing a picture. A revolution is an act of violence by which one class overthrows another. Soon all of China will be rising like a mighty storm. Every Chinese will be free to choose, but they must choose now. Read that essay, 1926, Mao, or 1927, I think, Mao's Report on Investigation into the Hunan province. Mao understood that the peasantry were going to be the basis of the Chinese Revolution, and he couldn't get his comrades to understand that. But ultimately, Mao did win out. It's probably one of the most important essays in history. The fact that was the essay where Mao said we need to embrace the peasant revolutionary movement. But the Narodniks, they were a movement in Russia that wanted to organize peasants, and the Bolsheviks said no, we want to organize the workers, right? The Russian Revolutionary Movement, the first current were what were called the Cadets, or the Constitutional Democrats. They didn't want to have a monarchy anymore. They just wanted to have an elected government. Constitutional Democrats. Then you had the Narodniks, and they wanted to lead the peasantry to rise up, like I said, and to inspire the peasantry to rise up and seize control of the land, to build farm cooperatives. Then you had what were called the terrorists. And the terrorists, and that wasn't like a slur, that was just what they called themselves. They argued the way to make a revolution was to engage in bombings and assassinations. I think Tsar Alexander III was killed by a terrorist. And Lenin's older brother was a terrorist, the terrorist movement, right? And then it was after the failure of the Constitutional Democrats, after the failure of the Narodniks, after the failure of the terrorists, you had the emergence of Georgy Plekhanov. And Georgy Plekhanov was the father of Russian Marxism. And Georgy Plekhanov said it would be the labor movement and the working class, factory workers, who would lead the revolution. And Georgy Plekhanov, he started the Emancipation of Labor Group, which eventually became the Russian Social Democratic Labor Party, the RSDLP, Russian Social Democratic Labor Party. And Lenin and Trotsky and Stalin and Bukharin and Zinoviev, they were all in the Russian Social Democratic Labor Party. And it was a Marxist group in Russia. But Lenin, was in exile in 1903, and he said, if we're going to win this thing, we got to be serious. That this loose association is not going to work. We need to form a party of new type, a party of new type, a special organization that will be dedicated to overthrowing the old system. We need to form a highly disciplined organization that will practice democratic centralism, meaning that all the debates stay internal and there's one message to the masses, that once a decision is reached, all members of the party are obligated to carry it out, whether they agree or not. It will function in a highly disciplined manner, democratic centralism. And this democratic centralist party will engage in agitation and propaganda. They will agitate. They will stir up the broad masses to a greater confrontation. When there's a strike, the Bolsheviks will go to the strike and stir it up, make it bigger, and they will agitate. And then they will be finding the smartest and the most advanced fighters in the country. And instead of agitating to the advanced, they will propagate, and they will teach Marxism to the most advanced, the people that can understand it. And that's the theory. That was the theory. That's what is to be done. Lenin's important book, is really all about, right? It's kind of a hard book to read because it's full of obscure Russian names and, outdated references and stuff. But that's what it's about, building the party of new type. And Lenin had a meeting in London in exile where he was hiding out after he'd been kicked out of Russia. He had this meeting and he got all these big Marxists together. And he said, all right, we're going to form a party of new type. Who's down? And the majority of the people in the room said, we're with you and we'll join. And the minority of the people in the room said, we don't want to join. So the people who joined were the majority group. They were called the Bolsheviks. And the people who didn't want to join, they were called the Mensheviks, the minority group. And from then forward, there were two Russian Social Democratic Labor parties. There was the Russian Social Democratic Labor Party, parenthesis, Bolshevik, and there was the Russian Social Democratic Labor Party, parenthesis, Menshevik. And the Russian Social Democratic Labor Party, Bolshevik, had two newspapers, only two. The Russian Social Democratic Labor Party, Menshevik, it was private. The newspapers weren't run by the party. Members had their own press that printed their own newspapers. But the Russian Social Democratic Labor Party, Bolshevik, the Bolsheviks, because they were democratic centralists, they had one face to the masses. They had only one newspaper. And they had a newspaper that was like a daily newspaper that was agitational, and it was called Pravda, which means truth. And then they had a theoretical newspaper. It was about ideology, and it was propaganda propagating, their Marxist ideas. And it was called Iskra, which means spark. And so Iskra was the theoretical journal. Pravda was the agitational daily newspaper. Stalin was the editor of Pravda. Bukharin was the editor of Iskra. And that was how the Bolshevik Party was set up. And that was the Bolsheviks. And in 1917, after Tsar Nicholas abdicated, and you had, Russia was in a state of revolutionary upheaval, Lenin came back from exile. He was brought back by the German secret police. They paid for him to come in a secret train. The German imperialists were at odds with the American and British imperialists, so they thought it might be convenient to send a Bolshevik agitator back to Russia. So they sent Lenin on a sealed train back to Russia. They gave him safe passage. And they gave him a lot of money, probably too. And Lenin showed up in Russia with a bunch of German money. And when he got to Russia, he told the Bolsheviks they had to completely change everything. And he came out with what he called the April Thesis. And this April Thesis, it was this document he wrote. And he said, if we're gonna win, this is our moment. The Tsar just stepped down. The people are in a revolutionary state of upheaval. We're gonna win. We're going to win. We've got to completely change the way we're operating. And we got to demand to end the war. We want to end the war. Everyone wants to stop fighting in World War I. But, the government wants to continue World War I. So we can use that as the polarization issue. We're the anti-war guys. Are you for the war? Well, then you're with the provisional government. But if you're against the war, you're with the Bolsheviks. They'll polarize society around that question. And Lenin said we got to change our name because these social democrats support the war. So we're going to call ourselves the Communist Party. We're the Russian Communist Party, aka the Bolsheviks. We're not the Social Democratic Party anymore. And, peace, land, and bread, the Bolshevik Party, they came out with their program, which was to end the war, redistribute land to the peasants, food, redistribute food, and and such, peace, land, and bread. They were going to end the war, and they were called the Communist Party or the Bolsheviks. And they pulled it off, right? And they ultimately took power, right? And that's the Russian Revolutionary Movement. That's just a quick summation of the Russian Revolutionary Movement and how it happened. You know, that's generally how it was done. It was a series of alliances. It was the formation of a highly disciplined organization. It was understanding the unique situation of their country at that time. And something like that would never work in the United States. Democratic centralism, for example, in the United States has been a disaster. Anyone who tries to start a democratic centralist party in the United States, it's a recipe for building an irrelevant authoritarian cult. That's what all the democratic centralist parties in the United States are. They are irrelevant authoritarian cults where they don't get anything done, and there's only allowed, you know, no one's allowed to think, and you know, it doesn't work. You know, agitation propaganda does not work in the United States because everyone can Google everybody, right? The idea that you're going to trick the people into a greater confrontation and only kind of preach communism to the advanced, not going to work. Not going to work. These are outdated methods. They're worth studying, right? They're worth studying and understanding them. And you need to study them and understand them before you criticize them. But ultimately, you know, the Bolsheviks were operating in a society where less than, you know, I mean, we're talking like less than 30, like it was about like 30-40% of the population could read. Okay. There was no internet back then. There was no television back then. You know, and it was the idea that you're going to organize in the same methods that the Bolsheviks used in these very, very, very different times is just pure delusion. And that's the dogmatism, the trap of dogmatism. You get stuck in, well, that's what Lenin did, so that's what we got to do. You're going to fall into a trap because it doesn't work that way. This isn't 1917. We're not in Russia. And, you know, we should study all of it, but blindly follow none of it and try to figure out a formula for how something that can actually work in this country in our time. So, well, we see Russia building its home gun industries so it isn't reliant on Western brands. Very good. All right. Anyway, Polish friend says that when the Polish American friend says they cracked down brutally on Poles when they entered Poland. I mean, a lot of bad things happened in World War II. There was heavy political repression during that time. You have to remember 27 million people in the Soviet Union died in World War II. 27 million. Okay? That is a large number, folks. Oh, damn it. Oh, damn it to hell. All right. What just happened there? Wow. All right. You all still there? I can't believe my camera is still on. Wow. That's kind of a miracle. That is a miracle that my camera is still on. It survived the crash. Wow. Look at that. Well, you got to see my ceiling. So there you go. This is a wild night. This is how you can tell I'm a real dude, folks. A lot of people think I'm like faking being a guy in my Brooklyn apartment, talking into my camera at midnight, but you know, I am the real deal. My camera just fell off of its tripod. That's how real I am. Vosh is nowhere near as real as me. So there you go, folks. There you go. Wow. You can tell that I am definitely a real dude. I am definitely a real dude. Look at that. Look at that. I'm actually, I want to roll this back so I can see the moment it fell on the old screen. But yeah, there we go. All right. What was the point I made? I said 27 million people died, and then it went whoosh, whoosh, boom, crash. Wow. And then I picked it up. Look at that. Right. And you look at that. Look at that. That was amazing. I just watched the rollback. I just wanted to see what my room looked like. That was something special. All right. Anyway, the point I was making before my camera fell down was that 27 million people died in the Soviet Union during World War II. That is a number we can't comprehend, those kind of conditions. And those kind of conditions that people were facing during those times necessitated heavy authoritarianism. And I'm sure there was a lot of repression. Now, I know there's debate about things like the Katyn massacre, and there's debate about other aspects of Soviet society. But the reality is, you know, during that period, there were a lot of people who ended up in gulags who didn't belong there. There was a lot of executions in military kind of stuff, And, you know, it's these are conditions we can't understand. And that's the main thing is, you know, we can talk about Marxism and stuff. We can understand the concept, but you know, we can defend all that these people achieved, but we can't relate to this. We can't relate to this. We really can't relate to this. You know, and the idea that we're going to do something like what the Bolsheviks did, we're going to storm the Winter Palace, that's not going to happen. That's not how these things work. All right. Peasantry nature of China's social revolution. Explain Mao's ultra-leftism. Oh, that's a good question. All right. Writing it down. The nature of China's revolution. Explain Mao's ultra-leftism. Question mark. All right. It's the deep state, Caleb. Careful. Haha. No, they didn't make my thing crash. That was all me. All righty. Okay. There we go. All right. Yeah, there was heavy repression during that time. So there you go. The Brezhnev era USSR. Well, look, I mean, so, all right. So Khrushchev came in and launched what they called de-Stalinization. And that was an effort. It was, you know, he was trying to basically roll back a lot of the Marxist ideology, water things down, etc. And then Brezhnev was seen as largely an attempt to somewhat go back to the way Stalin had done things. Now, not completely, right? They didn't like put Stalin's picture back up. And, you know, but Brezhnev, in a lot of ways, he was seen as kind of trying to kind of pick up the pieces from Khrushchev's, kind of the negative results of Khrushchev's de-Stalinization. That, you know, Khrushchev and his policies of de-Stalinization, his economic reforms, and some of the political reforms, watering down the Marxist ideology, it had a negative effect. Brezhnev was seen as trying to go back to it. But Brezhnev was also seen as very stale. You know, I mean, the Brezhnev era was marked by staunch bureaucratism. Brezhnev was a very old dude, and he'd been through it all. And it was seen as a period where some of the problems that the Soviet Union had, you know, you have to remember, so the Soviet Union, right, they have the Russian Revolution, then they have the Russian Civil War, where hundreds of countries invade, and, you know, I mean, not hundreds of countries, 15 different countries invade. I think it was more than 15. Invade. Millions of people are killed. It's awful. They're subject to a barricade. Food and medicine can't get in. And then during that, they have to have some market policies. They have the new economic policy and to try and get the economy going again. And then you have the 5-year economic plans of Stalin, where they mobilized to just build that country up, and they industrialized rapidly, and they built the world's largest steel industry, and they built power plants, and they wiped out illiteracy, and they built modern universities, and they had real economic achievements, and they just kind of, you know, were mobilizing to build up the country during the 5-year economic plans of the 1930s. And then you had World War II, and World War II, you know, 27 million people killed, the whole country destroyed. So then after World War II, they start building again, and they rebuild the country, and they reindustrialize, and they build it up once again. And then Stalin dies. And after the death of Stalin, a couple of years later, you have Khrushchev, who comes in and says, oh, basically all the propaganda from the West about Stalin, that's all true. And I want to negotiate with the West. He starts implementing market reforms. And by the time of Khrushchev, there was starting to be some stagnation. You have to remember what these people had been through. We cannot imagine. And that's why increasingly, the more that I study the Russian Revolution, the more I come to recognize that it's really something we in the West cannot relate to. We have never been through anything like this. Millions of people dying in World War II. The whole country mobilizing to industrialize during the 5-year plans. Millions of people dying in the Russian Civil War. I mean, these are huge calamities. And I mean, it's what the Soviet Union achieved were miracles. The fact that they invented space travel, the fact that they wiped out illiteracy, the fact that in some of the worst possible conditions you can imagine. I mean, you know, what went on during the Russian Civil War and what went on during the Second World War, and everything they endured, the blockades and the attacks and the subversion and then later the threat of nuclear annihilation and then the atomic bomb and the nuclear race with the United States. the fact that the Soviet Union achieved so much is nothing short of a miracle. And it shows that socialism is better than capitalism. I mean, and that's clear. No country under such threat would be able to survive. But the Soviet Union not only survived, it wiped out illiteracy, it fully industrialized, it doubled the life expectancy, it became a modern industrial superpower. That shows that socialist methods, central planning, 5-year economic plans, public ownership of the means of production can work. And the people who tell us that socialism doesn't work are idiots. Because if you look at everything the Soviet Union was up against, the fact that they accomplished everything they did, it shows you that socialism works, but that's all it really shows. The idea that we should copy Bolshevik organizing methods, no. The idea that we should try to, adopt their political system, no. Their political system was a result of the conditions they were in. Their organizing methods were a result of the conditions that they were in. Everything the Bolsheviks did, everything that Stalin did, all of this was the result of the conditions they were in. And, okay. All right. Difference between invasion and special operation. And so the Brezhnev era was an attempt to go back to some of the economic policies and some of the ideological, policies of the Stalin years. But some of the weariness of the population had already set in. When people go through that much, the population just gets weary of it. You can only have war for so long. And the enthusiasm, Stalin really depended on enthusiasm to get done what he did. Stakhanovism. They talked about Stakhanovism, right? It was where workers would work extra hard and try to outdo each other in how hard they worked. Who can dig the most coal and who can work the most hours. And during the 1930s, when Stalin was industrializing the USSR, there was this enthusiasm that the country had. They were all working extra hard. They all wanted to sacrifice for the homeland. And by the Brezhnev years, there was a lot of cynicism, a lot of feeling that, screw this, a lot of hopelessness. And as much as Brezhnev was not where Khrushchev was trying to water down the ideology and trying to demonize, trying to undo, but basically trying to take apart the system. They were not able to restore that enthusiasm. They were not able to restore that energy, right? The energy of the society had kind of bogged down. Now, during the Brezhnev years, the USSR's foreign policy rapidly shifted. During the 60s, the Soviet Union was trying to stop revolutionary groups in the third world from fighting against U.S. imperialism. But, during the Brezhnev years, the Soviet Union became much more radical in its foreign policy, supporting armed revolutionary groups in Latin America, etc. So Brezhnev was kind of a shift to the left in terms of foreign policy. It was an attempt to kind of undo Khrushchev's de-Stalinization, but it lacked the energy. It lacked the energy. There was kind of a stale, bureaucratic tone to things. And the Brezhnev years and the Yuri Andropov administration, all of that kind of set the stage for Gorbachev coming in. And Gorbachev tried to implement market reforms, and the result of that was destroying the Soviet Union. The Soviet Union, over the course of being attacked, invaded, surrounded, blockaded, threatened with nuclear war, it developed a very, very stagnant, solid system. And they couldn't bend. They couldn't adjust. And if you can't bend, you break. And that's what happened. That's what ultimately happened. Gorbachev tried to bend, and they broke. And that's the way it works, right? If you think about trees, the trees that stay up are the trees that are more flexible, that, have give. When the wind blows, if the tree is more flexible, it can just, and it's fine, right? But if a tree is just solid, the wind comes along, crack, it's gone, right? If you can't bend, you break. And the Soviet Union couldn't bend. And Gorbachev came along and said, oh, we're going to bend, broke, right? And that was the problem. The Soviet Union needed to be more like China. They needed to have market sectors. They needed to allow, people to start their own businesses. They needed to find a way that the intellectuals, the engineers, the college professors, people like that could feel more included in society. They needed to adjust, and they were unable to do so. And so when you can't bend, you break. That's what I always tell people about the Soviet Union. All right, next question. Jeffrey Sachs has changed his political angle. Yes, he has. Jeffrey Sachs is very much a social democrat now, or like a Bernie Sanders type. I wouldn't call him a full-on social democrat, but he's a Bernie Sanders type, and he says he's critical of U.S. foreign policy in a lot of ways. But that's all very, very new. When he was running, economics out of Columbia University and working with the Clinton administration, he was Mr. Neoliberalism. But yeah, he's changed a lot. He's certainly shifted his stance on a lot of issues. Yeah, that's true, right? What's the difference between a Marxist and an anarchist? Okay, so I'll just give you a quick summary, the way I always do, right? So basically, everyone who's anti-capitalist wants to create a stateless, classless world. That's the ideal. The question is, how do you get there? And there are 3 schools of thinking about how you get there. The first school of thinking is called social democracy. And social democracy argues that one step at a time, capitalism will just kind of naturally turn into socialism. One day we'll pass a new labor law, another day we'll have tax reform, and the next day we'll, lower the voting age to 16. And one day, gradually, socialism is, quote, the sum of reforms. That's the idea of social democracy, that out of Western capitalism, socialism will eventually emerge. That's social democracy. Then there's Marxism, or Marxism-Leninism, or communism, or 21st century socialism, scientific socialism, whatever you want to call it. And that says, no, it's not a question of enacting gradual reforms that one day add up to Marxism, or that add up to socialism, and eventually socialism leads to communism, a stateless classes world. It's a struggle for political power. It's a struggle to seize political power. It's not a question of enacting reforms that gradually eventually add up into socialism. It is a struggle to seize political power, that through seizing control of the state, the dictatorship of the proletariat can be established. And with the dictatorship of the proletariat, a socialist economy can be created. And eventually that socialist economy will lead to the stateless classes world of communism. So social democrats see it as a struggle for implementing gradual reforms. Marxists see it as a struggle to capture political power. Anarchists see it as anarchism is generally defined, I guess I should say, by the rejection of politics. Anarchists are not interested in government. They don't want to reform the government, and they don't want to seize control of the government. They believe that they can create the stateless, classless society on a voluntary basis, right? That they are going to form worker cooperatives, that there is going to be a great general strike led by the labor unions, that there is going to be autonomous communities that are created, and that without coercion and without involvement by the state, this non-capitalist society can emerge. That is what defines anarchism. And anarcho-syndicalism argues that instead of focusing on a political struggle, the focus should instead be on the struggle of the worker against the employer, right? And that's the syndicalists argued it was the trade union question. No interest in politics. And then on top of that, you have different schools, of thought among anarchists. But ultimately, anarchism is the school of thought that rejects political struggle. Social democrats have a reformist political struggle. Marxists have a revolutionary political struggle. They want to take control of the state. And anarchists reject politics and instead favor the creation of a non-capitalist society on the basis of voluntary cooperatives and associations. The most prominent form of anarchism is what's called anarcho-syndicalism. It says it's on the basis of the labor movement and the workers' struggle to seize control of their factories. But there are other strands of anarchist thought. I consider anarchism to be a petty bourgeois deviation. I am a Marxist. I view things in a Marxist way. Yeah, I'm a 21st century socialist, but I'm eclectic. I'm an anti-imperialist. I'm eclectic. I'm open to other forms of socialism. I'm a city builder socialist. We have the CPI, Center for Political Innovation viewpoint. I'm not a classical dogmatic Marxist, I guess, but I defend the Soviet Union. I defend China. I defend Vietnam and Cuba and Nicaragua. I defend Ba'athist Arab socialism in the Arab world. I defend African socialism like Kwame Nkrumah. I am a 21st century socialist, anti-imperialist. I come out of Marxism-Leninism, though I at this point am critical in a lot of ways of classical Marxism-Leninism. That's the way I come at things. But the anarchist perspective rejects the struggle for political power. All right. How does the Western public not see through all of this? Are we a lost cause? Of course. How would they see through it? I mean, you can't blame them. I mean, you have to really dig to find anyone who says anything close to the truth about the Ukraine situation. Social media is being censored. They have pumped out the propaganda, the troll farms. I keep seeing all these little tiny, YouTube channels that are being set up to attack me just randomly. Do you think that's what's going on here? I mean, I've got 21,000 followers. You think just randomly all these people are like, hey, I'm going to start a new YouTube channel and I'm going to demonize Caleb because, and I mean, the barrage of crazy pro-Ukrainian bots and trolls on social media. And this is an all-out mobilization by the bourgeoisie. I mean, this is, it reminds me of McCarthyism. Reminds me of after 9/11, how hysterical things got. This is a full-on mobilization by the bourgeoisie. And in a full-on mobilization like this, it can be very, very, very difficult, very, very difficult to maintain the perspective. But I'm doing that, and we're not surrendering. We're not backing down. Russia is not our enemy. Russia is right to move in and protect Donetsk and Lugansk and break apart the Ukrainian military. I support the special denazification operation, and I will not back down. And we at the Center for Political Innovation will not back down on that either. And look, people can remember. I heard the story many times about how when the USA was getting ready to invade Iraq, they had this heart-wrenching video on CNN of this girl, this young girl crying and saying, and they took the babies and they pulled them out of the incubators. It's awful. Oh my God. Oh my God. And it was so heart-wrenching, and they showed it on CNN over and over and over again. And it was just a fact. Everybody knew that Saddam Hussein was pulling babies out of incubators, and we had to go in to the Middle East and have a war to rescue the Kuwaiti people from evil Saddam Hussein. And the International Action Center, started by the heroic U.S. Attorney General Ramsey Clark, was leading anti-war protests, and their phones were ringing around the clock. Please put out a statement denouncing Saddam Hussein. Please, you can say you're against the war, but you have to denounce evil Saddam. Look at the TV. This poor woman's crying and they're pulling babies out of incubators and it's awful. You have to denounce Saddam Hussein for his evil invasion of Kuwait. Don't you know about these babies in the incubators? And oh my God, and the phone was ringing around the clock. You cannot. And at your protest, in order to have your protest, you have to write a statement to denounce what Saddam Hussein is doing. If you're going to protest the war, I'm not going to donate to your organization. I'll cut off my donation if you don't immediately denounce Saddam Hussein for what he did. Oh my God, he pulled babies from incubators. It was this full-on mobilization. Well, the International Action Center did not denounce Saddam Hussein for pulling babies from incubators because it didn't happen. And then 2 years after the war, it was revealed that entire testimony was faked. I'm not exaggerating, not a conspiracy theory, fact. The whole thing was a fucking hoax. The woman did not testify under oath. They didn't even have her swear in. They hired a public relations firm to tell her where to stand and to set up the lighting. The whole thing, that whole video, it was supposed to be testimony before Congress. The whole thing was staged. And the woman who was crying about the babies in the incubators had never been to Iraq, had never been to Kuwait. She was not in Kuwait when the invasion happened. She was a member of the Kuwaiti royal family, was living in the United States. The whole thing was staged. It was fake. That's what they do. That's what they do. They lie, folks. They lie. And a lot of what we're seeing about Ukraine is already coming out to be fake. They're using videos from Libya. They're using videos from Syria. They're using videos from Iraq. They're using videos from fucking video games. They're lying. They're lying. They're lying. They're lying. And after this is all over, we're going to know to what extent they lied. But right now, I am taking a hard line, and so is the Center for Political Innovation. And obviously, there are many Ukrainian folks who've been hurt, no doubt. There are probably atrocities that have been committed on both sides of this war. But I am not going to back down. I know that U.S. imperialism is the main enemy of the people of the world. I know that the government the USA installed in Kiev in 2014 is full of Nazis and Nazi collaborators. I know, and I've talked to people, I've met people from Donetsk and Lugansk who have lived under the bombing and the shelling that regime is subject to, and the food blockades. I have been to Crimea. I have walked the streets of Yalta and talked to people who are happy to be part of Russia. And I am not going to buy into this. And if you buy into this, you're being weak, and you are giving in to the system, and you shouldn't do it, right? You are basically saying that you trust the biggest murderers and the biggest liars and the biggest terrorists in the world, the Wall Street, Pentagon imperialists. You're saying you trust them and you prefer them over Russia and over the people of the eastern regions. I think the people of Donetsk and Lugansk are my comrades. Writing it down. People of Donetsk and Lugansk are my comrades, and I'm not going to throw them under the bus, and I'm not going to say that Russia doesn't have the right to protect them from the horror that they've endured. If you look at the other side of the story, you'll see what these Ukrainian freedom fighters are doing right now. Pouring, painting people's faces green and destroying their vision, tying them to poles. I mean, it's just horrendous what these people are doing. It's horrendous what is happening. And they have torture facilities, and they have the Pentagon's been setting up bio labs. You think the Russians didn't know about these bio labs? But they didn't announce it to the world. They didn't announce, oh my God, Ukraine is building weapons of mass destruction. No, they intervened, and now they're saying, and just so you know, part of the reason we did this is because we knew about these, biological weapons facilities you were building. And then the United States is going, oh, they're not biological weapons facilities. They're just biological research facilities that happen to be set up by the Pentagon. What is the Pentagon? The Pentagon doesn't have anything to do with the military, right? Yeah. Give me a break. Give me a break, folks. I mean, I am so tired. I hear Joe Biden say, Russia's unprovoked invasion. This invasion, first of all, it's not an invasion, right? An invasion, and that's one of the questions. I'll just answer it now. Someone said, well, what's the difference between an invasion and an operation? An invasion in military terms would be they were trying to take over Ukraine or conquer Ukraine or overthrow the government of Ukraine. They don't want to do that. They're not interested in making Ukraine part of Russia. They're not interested in, conquering Ukraine or overthrowing its government. They just want to protect the people of the eastern regions and recognize their right to independence. And they just want to break apart that Ukrainian military full of weapons threatening them, right? This is a security operation. That's what this is. I don't know who that is, but thank you for the info. This is a security operation. And, when they say it's unprovoked, it's an unprovoked operation. Well, it was provoked in 2014 when the United States overthrew the Ukrainian government. It was provoked when the USA started piling weapons into Ukraine. It was provoked when the Ukrainian government, backed by the United States, made the Azov Battalion, a group of Nazis, an official wing of their government. It was provoked when they bombed and shelled Donetsk and Lugansk for 8 years straight. They branded their own people as terrorists. It was provoked when they signed the Minsk Accords in 2015 and never implemented them. It was provoked when the Kiev government announced it wanted to get nuclear weapons. It was provoked when the Kiev government announced that it wanted to join the NATO alliance and bring the NATO alliance right to Russia's borders. It was provoked when you had a situation where, as we now know, there were a large number of biological weapons labs being set up by the Pentagon. It was provoked and 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 provoked. They did everything possible to provoke it. And now what they're trying to do is prolong it. They don't want this war to end. They want it to keep going. They have had the CIA in Ukraine training these fanatical groups for the past 5 or 6 years. They have had a whole program. This is admitted by Yahoo News. They've been setting up Ukraine for a long-term war. That's what they've been doing. That's what they've been doing. That's what they've been doing. Yeah, they've been setting up for a long-term war. And they've been setting up for a long-term war against Russia. And they are planning, this is like, they want this to be the new Afghanistan. Brzezinski bragged about the Afghan trap for the USSR and how they gave the Soviet Union of Vietnam. That's what they want to do. And that shows, folks, they don't give a shit about Ukrainians. If you love the Ukrainians, you'd want this war to end as soon as possible. They don't want that. They want this to be a prolonged conflict. They want Russia and Ukraine to be fighting each other for a long time to weaken Russia. They don't give a shit about Ukraine. If they cared about Ukraine, they'd be pushing Zelensky to negotiate right now. They'd be pushing for a way for this to stop. They don't want it to stop. They want to pile up Ukrainian bodies. That's what they want. They want to pile up Ukrainian corpses because they want to bog down Russia in a long-term intervention. That's what this is about, folks. So do not believe them. Do not believe them when they say they care about the Ukrainians, because they don't. They don't care about Ukrainian lives. Don't believe it for a minute. All right. Okay, so we got a couple of those out of the way. Next question. What compels a person to virtue signal? Well, everyone wants to be liked, right? Everyone wants people to think they're a good person. I think it's pretty basic, right? People virtue signal because they want other people to see them in a positive light. I mean, right? It's the same reason people give to charity. It's the same reason that, that people do anything that they, people want to be thought of by others as good. And so if the memo goes out that if you support Black Lives Matter, that makes you good, people are going to do it, and they're going to make a show of doing it. If the memo goes out that supporting Ukraine makes you good, people are going to do it. I mean, that's generally how these things work. I mean, it's just like, I remember when I was driving down the highway when I was a kid. I wasn't driving, but, I was riding down the highway with my family. I think there's one highway. It's either in like Ohio or Pennsylvania where it's like every few miles you see like 3 crosses along the side of the road. And that's because some millionaire, when he died, he left in his will that he was going to build crosses along the highway to promote Christianity. Well, that guy did that to virtue signal. He wanted everyone to think, wow, what a great guy. He spent his money promoting Christianity. Wow. It's the same reason. It's like people generally want the approval of others. It's one of the most basic human needs, right? Is we want other people to like us. That's why it's so hard in times like this to take a hard line and stand against the mob and say, no, Russia is not our enemy. No, this was a provoked intervention. No, Russia is doing the right thing. It's hard because we are going to win the disapproval of others, but we have to take a hard line. Sometimes you have to take a hard stance. All right. Russia building its homegrown industries so it isn't reliant on Western brands. Well, yes. A lot of Russian industries are being nationalized. There's the whole thing with McDonald's, I think people have seen, that's been going around. And yes, they're reasserting a lot of state control over the economy. They've actually passed a number of very positive reforms, raising the pay of Russian workers, etc. Yes, the attacks of the imperialists are going to force Russia to move in a more socialistic direction. And, the Communist Party is a huge supporter of this operation in Ukraine. So because they're supporting what's happening now, the Communist Party is probably going to become more important in Russian politics. They were already becoming more important. They got a lot more seats in the last election. And because they're so supportive of this, and they're so supportive of Donetsk and Lugansk and the People's Republics, we're probably going to see the Communist Party become more important. All right, whatever. So there you go. Is the peasant nature of China's revolution a way to explain Mao's ultra-leftism? Sure, there's an element of truth in that, right? The peasant revolutions tend to be very bloody. They talk about peasant Jacobinism and that the peasants are oppressed in really, really brutal ways. You know, they're not allowed to look the landlord in the face. Their basic human rights are denied. And, you know, the French Revolution, it was largely the peasantry that were the force behind the really bloodthirsty, you know, the guillotine and all of that. So, you know, yes, these things, you know, I mean, you can say that. You can say that for sure. That part of why, and the kind of the religious aspect, right? The fact that Maoism has this kind of vaguely religious and utopian vibe to it. That a lot of, like, Enver Hoxha is very critical in his book Imperialism and the Revolution, the leader of socialist Albania. When he was criticizing Mao Zedong thought, he said it has this oddly religious vibe. It seems like the military and the students are more central than the labor unions. And yeah, a lot of what we now call Maoism or Mao Zedong thought, there is a definitely a peasant aspect of it. I always tell people the Taiping uprising, you know, it ended 30 years before Mao was born. There was this huge revolutionary upsurge in China among the peasantry. It wasn't communist, it was Christian. It was this guy who claimed he was Jesus's younger brother brought to earth, and he was going to create the Taiping heavenly kingdom in China. And he led this huge rebellion in Chinese society among the peasants. And it was a huge civil war, the Taiping Rebellion, the Taiping Uprising. That had a huge impact on Mao. And, you know, when Mao took power, they actually there's a monument to the Taiping Uprising in Tiananmen Square. And, you know, the Taiping Uprising was a peasant rebellion that had this religious, spiritual quality to it. You know, these things were a big part of you know, and so, yes, the peasant aspect of China's revolution probably had a lot to do with the Cultural Revolution, probably had a lot to do with some of the weird beliefs that you could achieve a higher stage in poverty. Kind of the ultra-leftism of the Gang of Four was probably rooted in some of the peasant roots. That's absolutely true. All right. And why are they using yuan in Saudi Arabia? Because Saudi Arabia has to negotiate with Russia. Russia is a major oil exporting country. Saudi Arabia is a major oil exporting country. And Saudi Arabia, you know, Putin and the Saudi, you know, crown prince are on the phone a lot negotiating about how much oil output goes on in order to deal with the oil prices. And so if the Saudis were to, you know, jump on board fully with the United States during this time, this Ukraine thing, that would hurt their ability to negotiate around oil prices, right? Both of these major oil exporting countries, they have to figure out how much oil they're going to export and how much output they're going to do, because that has a huge impact on the global economy. And so the United States is like demanding the whole world join their anti-Russia crusade right now. And the Saudis are saying, yeah, but what about when we have to call Putin on the phone and negotiate the oil prices? How's that going to work? And so they're saying, okay, well, maybe we'll start taking Chinese yen when it comes to products. So there you go. You know, so I think that's what's going on there. But listen, folks, that's all the super chats for now. So I guess we're going to end this the way we always do. I want to thank Robert Lawrence for making this amazing trailer. You know, this amazing closing, you know, of the closing mantra. He made this video for it. So we'll show this.
In the struggle against U.S. imperialism is now emerging throughout the world. Ever since World War II, U.S. imperialism and its followers have been continuously launching wars of aggression. But the people of various countries have been continuously waging revolutionary wars to defeat their aggression. And while the danger of a new world war still exists, and the people of all countries must get prepared, revolution is the main trend in the world today.
While the danger of a new world war still exists, and the people of all countries must get prepared, revolution is the main trend in the world today. We need a government of action that will fight for working families. Good night, everybody. Thanks for watching. I'll hopefully be back soon. Hopefully doing a lot more of these now that I'm at home. So all my best wishes, everybody. Talk to you soon.